This is disc number 4.
I glanced down at them. I had no reason to doubt her, but they just looked like normal sneakers to me. I watched how he pulled out the chair for Savannah, then waited for her to sit. A nice boy from a nice family, my mother would have said, even without knowing how much his sneakers cost. My mother never forgave me for marrying Gabriel. "You're pretty enough to marry up," she'd said. "Don't marry a Marine, marry a millionaire." But I had no idea how to meet a millionaire. I know it sounds shallow, but part of the reason I wanted to move to Calabasas was so Savannah would meet kids from families with means. Not just so she could marry one, but so she could be one herself. Sure, we had money now, but I had no idea how this would end. I had suppressed evidence of a crime, accepted a bribe, lied to the police. I did it to help Savannah have a better life than I did, but she would only be helped if I didn't get caught. If I wound up in jail where I belonged, she'd need the kind of friends who could afford $800 sneakers. "This garlic bread is amazing," Logan raved as he helped himself to a second piece, making sure to offer the basket to Savannah before he set it back down. We ate family style, passing bowls back and forth and all helping ourselves. Libby asked Logan a million questions. "Are you still living at home? What will you study at Harvard? What inspired you to take a gap year?" She even got away with the dreaded, "So, how did you two meet?" without eliciting an eye roll. She was a skilled conversationalist, peppering her questions with anecdotes about her own schooling, why she chose William and Mary for undergrad and Columbia for her PhD. Andy chimed in as well, describing how he dumped his pre-med track for an economics degree once he realized what a bitch organic chem, whatever that is, turned out to be. I enjoyed hearing their stories, but I had absolutely nothing to add. As they chatted about favorite professors and books, I tried to make myself as small as possible, praying the conversation would not turn to me. I never went to college. Me and my rudimentary math skills took a job as a bookkeeper right out of high school. I had no idea who William or Mary was, or what you might learn from going to school with them, and I didn't want to make a fool out of myself for asking. Libby was kind enough to only look at me when the conversation turned to simpler things, like my salad. Were the croutons homemade? Or what restaurants we'd been to. If you haven't tried Delmonico's, you must. Or if I thought this heat wave will ever break. Everything about the evening confirmed what I already knew. I was a complete and total fraud. I didn't belong in this house or this neighborhood, and I was not going to be friends with Libby. I was both an outsider and a prisoner in my own home. They could never know what I'd done, where I came from, who I really was. I could never be close to anyone. I could never again be myself. This was the life I'd chosen with my lies and my crimes. The only question that remained was if it was worth living.
Evan, 3 months ago. The changes I was making to Jack's legal documents had to be notarized, which meant letting one other person in on our sin. I decided not to use my regular notary public or one that would come to my house, choosing a high-volume UPS store instead. I dressed down so I wouldn't be memorable and showed up for my appointment early so as not to risk pissing anyone off. As was the case with most rich people, Jack's money was all spread out. He had business accounts, investment accounts, real estate holdings, a personal savings account, a flow-through S corporation, a joint checking account with Kate, an equity line of credit, and, just in case all hell broke loose, a safe full of hundreds in his closet. Jack's cash flow was an intricate matrix of wire transfers taking money in through one entity and paying it out through another. Money was deposited into Jack's business account from the studio. The business account paid him a salary through his S-Corp. If he produced a movie, we set up a production account just for that picture, and he got an additional salary, or salaries, depending on how many jobs he was doing, that flowed through his S-Corp to whatever account he specified. Jack had a business manager and a CPA, but all transactions were monitored by Jack's wife, Kate. In her job as CFO of Jack's company, she authorized every transaction and audited the books every month for accuracy. She personally approved the movement of every dollar in and out of their accounts. In normal times, this was a huge weight off Jack's shoulders. But now it was a problem, because Jack needed money, more money than was in that safe, and he couldn't tell his wife. There was one account the missus didn't monitor. She didn't monitor it because she understood that it was not to be touched. It was the trust fund Jack had set up for their son. Money was put into this account, but was never taken out. Jack started depositing money into his only son's trust fund the day he was born. Now, after many movies and many years, it had grown to over $5 million. Jack and Kate went to extreme measures to keep this money safe. No couple plans to get divorced, but in the event they ever had to divide their estate, Jack and Kate wanted to make sure their son's money could not be touched, even by the two of them. So they made me the trustee. I had total control over it until their son turned 18. I never imagined I would do anything but gift it to him. But Jack told me I would no longer be giving this money to his son. Instead, I was to give it to Holly. Every last cent. I was to change the terms of the trust without telling anyone, including Kate. "Sign here," the gray-haired notary instructed without so much as looking at me. I was grateful for her indifference, and I complied in silence. There were so many ways this could end badly. It wouldn't take much for our circle of trust to collapse, so I tried not to think about the obvious weak link and how this financial juggling act might break our fragile pact wide open. I rolled my thumb on the ink pad and stamped my fingerprint in her ledger. This bribery plot suddenly, literally, had my fingerprints all over it. If one person cracked, we were all going down. Chapter 20. I woke up in a cold sweat. It wasn't the first time I'd had a nightmare about the accident, but this dream was particularly gruesome. I was back at the scene of the crash, walking toward the wreckage just as I had done in real life. As I peered down at Holly's husband's dead body, his mangled limbs suddenly came alive like Medusa's head of snakes, snapping at me with foaming white fangs. The snake's eyes flashed with rage as they strained against their tether, desperate to bite me but unable to reach. The dead man's bloody brain matter was oozing out of his skull like hamburger meat through a grinder. I tried to run, but as so often happens in dreams, I couldn't move my legs. My feet were cemented to the pavement as Medusa's snakes engulfed my feet, my legs, my torso. I cried out as I braced myself to drown in a rising sea of blood and guts. It was a little after 5 a.m. when I gasped myself awake. I was too shaken to go back to sleep, so I got up, showered, and opened my laptop at my kitchen table. As the coffee brewed, I clicked on my email. I saw that Jack had found a script he liked and was considering making an offer on it. He had production legal handle those details, so there was nothing for me to do, but he copied me so I would know what he was up to. I glanced at the subject line, possible new business, then archived it in the appropriate folder. Holly's credit card statement had also arrived. I had to keep track of what she was spending to make sure the $5 million we had allotted wasn't in danger of running out. We'd paid cash for the house and the car, which meant she had a little under $3 million left to fund her new life. I had the money in index funds with projected annual interest of about 6%. If she didn't spend more than $180,000 per year, that $3 million would last her forever. With no mortgage or car payment to make, I thought it more than enough. I moved the credit card statement to the encrypted server where I kept all the documents related to the accident. Then I opened it. It was my job to know how she was spending my client's money. And to be honest, I was curious. We had given her 2 credit cards, one for her and one for Savannah, so I knew which one of them was buying what. I tried not to panic when I saw Savannah's statement. She'd been to the Apple Store, Sephora, Victoria's Secret, Lady Foot Locker, and Louis Vuitton, all in one billing cycle. It wasn't a total surprise. I knew she would splurge. What I didn't know was if her spending would slow down or accelerate. What if she was testing the arrangement, setting the stage for more demands? Would I dare say no to her if she asked? That video evidence was damning, and she was too smart not to have made a copy, which meant we had no choice but to keep paying. The situation was as stable as a grenade, and Savannah had her finger on the pin. Holly, on the other hand, had barely bought anything. She spent a modest amount at a hair salon, $135 at Pottery Barn, a couple $100 on gas. The rest of her charges were at the grocery store. She went almost every day. They were mostly small amounts, under $20. Except for one charge at a sushi place, all her meals were made in her kitchen with food she bought at Gelson's. I tried to imagine what kinds of things she bought on those 20-some-odd trips to the grocery store. I figured a lot of fresh produce because why else would she have to go every day? Before I showed her the house, I outfitted the kitchen with everything I could think of. German knives, a stand mixer, an electric kettle, a full complement of measuring cups and spoons. Jack insisted that I do everything myself. He didn't want to risk anyone else knowing what we had done. I had never stocked a proper kitchen, but luckily the saleswoman at Bloomingdale's had and was all too happy to help. I thought about my own credit card statement, how different it was. I hadn't been to the grocery store once. Most of my charges were from restaurants, lunches with colleagues, dinner dates with women I'd never see again, or, on the nights I didn't want to chase or be chased, with myself alone at the bar. My brother used to rib me about being an incurable bachelor. And it's true, I had been a bit of a playboy. I had a lot of disposable income and plenty of choices of what and whom to spend it on. Jack gave me access to all the hottest restaurants, clubs, and, yes, even women. But after a while, it started to feel like I was reliving the same date over and over again. My fancy suits attracted women who wanted to be dazzled, and I suppose I wore them because I feared if I didn't dazzle, I might disappear. But Holly was different. She wasn't chasing anyone or anything. She knew what it was like to grow up with nothing, feel that toxic mixture of longing and shame that comes from watching other people be handed what you had to suffer for. She knew what it was like to find yourself with riches you weren't sure you deserved, and how being surrounded by things you always thought were meant for other people, a new car, a shoe shine, a proper haircut, made you feel like an imposter in your own life. And, like me, she lived with the kind of ferocious grief that came with losing someone who fought to give you a comfortable, carefree life, but died before they could share it with you. Holly and I were close to the same age. She was 37, I was 38. I wondered if we had met under different circumstances, without the stench of the accident between us, if maybe she might have liked me. I never talked about myself to her, of course, so she had no idea how much we had in common, or how deeply I was drawn to her for her stoic integrity and gentle beauty. I was ready for a different kind of woman, a different kind of life, one that was not all about where to be, but how to be. Holly made me realize that. And now there was no going back. I could never tell her how I felt. That would be wildly inappropriate. But it didn't stop me from wishing I could.
Andy, 3 months ago. When the courier arrived with an express letter, I knew it was bad news. We were late on our mortgage, and I had at least a dozen unpaid bills. Tatum's trip to urgent care after she fell off the swing and her arm swelled up like a football cost us over $400, and I hadn't paid a nickel of it. The fall didn't break her wrist, but it did cause serious injury to our pocketbook. We literally had nothing left. I wondered why Libby hadn't divorced me. Then I realized we couldn't afford to get divorced, because that involves paying lawyers, and you need money for that. You also need a hell of a lot more money to maintain 2 residences instead of 1. If we got divorced, Libby would be living in a shitty 1-room apartment, and I'd be in a refrigerator box. I signed for the letter, then looked at the return address. It didn't have the word collections in it. Creditors were too smart for that. They didn't want to tip the delinquent recipient off before he signed for it, and risk it coming back unopened. I didn't recognize the name as someone we owed money to, but that was no surprise. At this point, my debts probably extended well into the sphere of strangers. I was about to open it when I saw it wasn't addressed to me. This certified letter that I had just signed for was for Libby. I got nervous for a whole new host of reasons. Maybe she had called a divorce lawyer after all. Her parents never offered to give us money, but they would certainly help her get out of a shitty marriage. Once divorced, she'd probably want to move back home to New York. I couldn't afford a long custody battle, so if I wanted to see my kids, I'd have to go too. A divorce would effectively end my career. The thought filled me with equal parts disappointment and relief. "Is that for me?" Libby asked as she appeared out of nowhere. The woman was like a cat. I never heard her coming. Or maybe the torrent of my tormented thoughts was so loud it drowned out the sound of her approaching footsteps. "It is," I said matter-of-factly, then offered her the envelope. But she didn't take it from me. Her hazelnut brown eyes flicked up to meet mine. It would break my heart to give up my career, but it would smash it to pieces to lose her. "You can open it," she said. I tried to read her expression. Normally I was pretty good at reading body language. She had her hands on her hips, which usually signal confidence, but could also indicate impatience or boredom. Her lips were pinched in a tight smile. People often smiled like that when they pitied you, or felt bad about something that happened, or was about to happen. All bad signs for me in that moment. I must have hesitated, or looked uncertain, because she egged me on. "Go ahead. It's not going to bite you." She shifted her weight. If hands on hips meant impatience, it was growing. I slid my thumb under the flap. The envelope was creamy and thick, the kind high-end law firms use, and I tried not to look nervous as I eased out the contents. It was 2 pages stapled together. The first page was a letter. "Dear Mrs. Berenson," I read aloud, "we are pleased to inform you that the 2.5-carat loose round diamond you placed with us on consignment has sold." I stopped reading and looked up at Libby. Her smile had flipped. Her eyes were shiny. "Oh, Lib," I said, letting the letter drop toward the floor. A tear leaked out and rolled down her cheek. I pulled her toward me and encircled her in a hug. The second page was a check. High 5 figures. Enough to give us room to breathe again. "I'm not giving up on you," she said, into my chest. Tears stung my eyes as I held her tight. We both knew she didn't have to do this. She could have insisted we pack up and leave. But she didn't. Because she was gloriously stubborn and fiercely loyal, and the best wife a man could ever hope for. I kissed her hair, and in that moment vowed to get us back on track. By working my ass off and writing a script the great Jack Kimball couldn't turn down. Chapter 21. It was Monday afternoon, and we still hadn't heard from Jack. He'd had the script exclusively for a week, and today was the deadline. I waited until after lunch, then called Laura, my agent. She hadn't heard anything, and her attempt to cheer me up only made me feel worse. If he doesn't want it, there are plenty of other buyers, she encouraged. But I knew how this would go. Laura would have to huddle with her colleagues and make a list of who else might respond to the material. That would take a week. Then she would have to call all the potential interested parties to tease that something big was coming. That would take another week, possibly more, depending on how many companies she was targeting. Then, in a coordinated attack, she would send the script to the 5, 10, or however many potential buyers she had lined up. Then we would wait for them to read it. It would take another 2 weeks minimum for responses to start coming in. Whoever Laura sent the script to would either pass or send it up the line to their boss or bosses. That's where most spec sales fizzled out. It only took one person at a given company to say no for a project to die, and there was always one. I had written this script specifically for Jack. The protagonist, a scrappy CIA agent in a strained marriage, which I wrote vividly from personal experience, was engineered to showcase Jack's particular brand of stoic charisma. It was an expensive movie to make, with its exotic European locations and big action scenes, so we couldn't move forward without a star. Hollywood didn't make many stars. If Jack didn't want to play the lead, our odds of landing another actor with his star power were slimmer than a lame horse winning the Kentucky Derby. Libby had taken control of our finances so I could spend the summer writing. It made sense, given that she and her diamond were the breadwinners this year, and I was all too happy to have the chore of juggling bills off my plate. I knew there were things she had gone without for many months, and she certainly deserved them, but with no guarantees I was ever going to work again, I knew she wouldn't indulge. She didn't complain, but I could tell she wasn't happy. I can't say I wish she hadn't sold her rock, because I don't know how we would have stayed afloat if she hadn't. But her patience was growing thin. We had burned through over half of our windfall in 3 short months. Watching our bank balance drop every month put us both on edge. And if this spec didn't sell, things were going to get a whole lot worse. I holed up in the garage to wait for news, checking my phone every 15 minutes to make sure I hadn't missed an email or call. I had run out of things to build, so was organizing my tools. I was hungry, but I didn't dare venture back into the house. Libby was probably in the kitchen making dinner. It was almost 5 o'clock. We sat down as a family between 5:30 and 6. Libby was an excellent cook, and for that I was truly grateful. It would have been a really long year if she wasn't. Another 2 cycles of phone checking went by, then Margot appeared in the doorway to collect me for dinner. Libby had made chicken Kiev, a favorite of the kids. She served the creamy stuffed chicken with a crisp garden salad. I knew from my memory that it was delicious, but all I could taste that night was disappointment. The girls were chatty, but I was so lost in self-loathing, I didn't hear a word they said. I didn't know how I would face the day tomorrow. Until tonight, I had dared to hope. Now I didn't even have that.
Holly, 3 months ago. The morgue called, asking what I wanted to do with my husband's dead body. It had been 10 days, and they couldn't keep it anymore. The morgue lady said, as sweetly as a person can when they're telling you your dead relative has overstayed his welcome. I tried to imagine what it was like for her, having to call people to tell them to come get their corpses. Who would want that job? In my job as a dentist bookkeeper, I occasionally had to call patients about an overdue bill, and I thought that was hard. I suddenly realized I'd had it easy. I had been home for 2 days. It was the same apartment I'd lived in since Savannah was a baby, but without Gabe, it didn't feel like home at all. I was still in bed when the phone rang, with my leg propped up on pillows, Gabe's pillows. Gabe always slept with 2, one under his head and one under his knees, so his back didn't hurt when he woke up. Gabe wasn't the cuddliest bedmate. We didn't spoon or anything. But not having him in bed was as jarring as losing a tooth. The hole next to me was gaping and bottomless and stung like salt on an open wound. Gabe didn't snore, but he did sleep with his mouth open, and I had come to rely on the gentle of him breathing to lull me to sleep. With him gone, I had to open the window to let in some traffic noise, because otherwise the silence made my ears ring. I slid my leg off the pillow tower so I could sit up. "I'm sorry," I told the morgue lady, easing my butt back to lean against the headboard, "but I'm not sure what to do about that." I rearranged the pillows, but I couldn't get comfortable. I always liked our mattress, but without Gabe's 165 compact pounds gently tilting it toward the center, it felt stiff and cold. It would have made more sense for me to sleep on his side now. It was closer to the door and less steps on my aching knee to get to the bathroom. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. So I stayed on my side, and when I woke up in the night to pee, I took the long way around the foot of the bed, avoiding the empty space I held for no one. It wasn't just the nights that were hard. I knew how to work the coffee maker, of course, but I had grown accustomed to waking to a full pot. I broke down in tears when I couldn't find the coffee filters. Savannah had to peel me away from the counter and make the coffee for me. I wondered if she'd made it before she went for her morning run today, because I couldn't face making it myself and I really needed a cup. "You should have gotten some forms in the mail," morgue lady said. Savannah had collected the mail while I was in the hospital, and it was piled on the coffee table. Gabe always opened the mail. If there was anything for me, he would put it on the little secretary I used as my writing desk. I didn't know what to do with his mail, so I just left it all sitting in a heap. "Sorry," I said again. "I'll look for it," I promised. I dreaded getting out of bed because that meant facing a whole new set of unfamiliar circumstances. We had a rhythm to our mornings. Gabe would shower first, so the bathroom would be warm and steamy for me when it was my turn. He always hung his wet towel over the curtain rod because he thought the towels would get smelly if we didn't spread them out to dry. The bristles on the electric toothbrush we shared would be damp when I reached for it, and he pretty much always left the cap off the toothpaste. But now the toothbrush was dry, the curtain rod was barren, and the bathroom felt chilly and hollow and strange. "I can recommend a funeral home if you'd like," the morgue woman said as I cried silently on my side of the call. "Do you live in the area?" "Not far," I managed. She rattled off the names of a couple of local funeral homes, but I didn't write them down. Then she explained the procedure for releasing the body and told me that once I decided on a funeral home, I would have to sign some more forms. "How many death certificates do you want?" she asked. "They cost $15 each." $15 seemed like a lot for a piece of paper. Plus, couldn't I just copy it if I needed more? "Just one, I guess," I said, not understanding why anyone would want more than that. "You'll need originals to collect any life insurance, Social Security, or military pension," she warned, "or close out any bank accounts not held jointly." I didn't think Gabe had bought life insurance or had secret bank accounts. It was possible he had military benefits, but I had no idea how to track those down, or how Social Security worked. "I see. I guess 2 then?" I said. "You can always order more," she said quickly, and I tried not to panic that I would not know how to do this. "Just have the funeral home call me," she said kindly. "I'll coordinate all the paperwork with them." And then she hung up. I looked over at my husband's dresser. There was still a cup of coffee on it, in the stout #1 dad mug Savannah had bought him last Father's Day. I picked it up and peered inside. The coffee had evaporated, leaving a thick layer of sludge on the bottom. There was a crescent-shaped stain where his mouth had been. I could still see the tiny vertical imprints of his lips. I slid my hand under the handle as I had seen him do 1,000 times. As I cradled the mug in my palm, I imagined his hand on top of mine, pressing it into the cup's gentle curve. I closed my eyes and imagined him holding me steady like he always did. "Don't let go," a voice called out, and it took me a few seconds to realize it was mine. Who am I talking to? There was no one there but me. Those hands that had held me, steered me, loved me, were rotting in the morgue, along with the shoulders I used to lean on and the eyes that always saw beauty in me, even on my ugly days. I gripped the mug with both hands and pulled the cold ceramic shell to my chest. "Don't let go," I repeated, then realized maybe the command was meant for me. My husband wasn't hanging on to this life anymore. The morgue lady made that crystal clear. But just because he had slipped away didn't mean he was out of my reach. We were soulmates. I knew it from the moment we met. The soul was eternal. My Sunday school teacher taught me that. Gabe was not gone. He had just moved on. I couldn't bring him back, but I could follow him where he went. I opened my eyes. I'd lived in this apartment for 15 years, but suddenly nothing about it was familiar to me. I didn't belong here anymore, that was clear. The only question was how far I would have to go to find home again. Chapter 22. I had taken 3 of the Vicodin they had prescribed me, which meant I should have 17 left. Savannah was at a track meet. Normally I would have gone, but when I thought about trying to navigate slippery metal bleachers with a leg that could barely bend, I lost my nerve. I had a temporary handicap placard, but sometimes they just parked you in an open field. Everybody had a reason for needing to park close. I have stuff to unload, I have my dog in the car, I need to be somewhere right after. I couldn't expect special privileges, even with the placard. And I wasn't good on uneven surfaces, I'd found that out the hard way. Take one every 4 to 6 hours as needed for pain, the label said. I popped off the top, then poured the pills out onto a plate. One of my old Corningware ones, not one of the fancy ones from Pottery Barn, though this arguably was a special occasion. The pills were chalky and white and left a powdery residue on my fingers. My brother had died from an overdose. One might conclude it ran in the family. I gazed out the front window into the yard. I never did find out what kind of flowers those were. I might have enjoyed doing some gardening when my knee was better. I had a good instinct for plants. Back at our old place, we sometimes grew tomatoes on the fire escape. We always had the best ones. They were so sweet we ate them like apples, right off the vine. I thought about Savannah, about how easy it was for her to settle into this new life. Logan was the center of her universe now. They spent every waking minute together. I rarely saw her without him. If Gabe were alive, he'd insist on meeting the parents to be sure they were kind and decent people. It's not that I didn't care. I just knew there was nothing I could do if they weren't. Savannah would find a way to hang out with Logan, whether I liked his parents or not. Plus, there was no way Logan's mom and dad could be more despicable than me. I was a worthless, limping, lying gold digger. They were certainly a step up, if not a whole staircase higher than I was. I missed my alone time with Savannah, but I was grateful she had found a boy to love and hoped it would last. I started dating Gabe when we were 16. People think you don't know what love is at that age, but I'm living proof that some people do. We were together for 2 years, then apart for the next 4. He was more appealing in the letters he wrote me than any man I met while he was deployed, and I married him the moment he got back. We were 22. Savannah was born that very same year. I knew their relationship was barely 3 weeks old, but I could tell by how she looked at him that Savannah was head over heels. He made her happy down to her bones. A good antidote for being with me. I felt relieved when she texted to say she wouldn't be home for dinner or until late, because then she wouldn't have to see me crying, which I did almost daily. I also didn't have to worry about infecting her with my pathetic self-pity. She deserved to be happy. She deserved to be free. I knew that she loved me, but with Evan paying for everything, she didn't really need me anymore. I certainly wasn't providing for her, quite the opposite. If anything, I had become a burden. Her future was bright. Mine was an abyss. I hadn't heard from Libby since our dinner party last week, and I knew why. I was a complete and total bore. We were probably close in age, but she had way more in common with Logan, who knew about politics and faraway places and what to say at dinner parties. Libby and I struggled to find anything to talk about beyond our favorite recipes and the weather. Any hope I had of us being friends was gone by dessert. I couldn't relate to her stories about heading off to college and starting a career, and I had nothing to offer her but lies. I counted out the Vicodin, then lined them up like little soldiers on the plate. There were 18, not 17. They must have given me one extra by mistake. I figured 9 or 10 would do the trick, but I'd take as many as I could get down. I didn't write a note. What was there to say? The only person on this earth I cared about would know why I was doing this. Between Logan and Evan, she would build a life not weighed down by me. I took the pills one at a time, then went upstairs to my bed to wait for death.
Evan, 3 months ago. I didn't know the first thing about buying a house. I knew how it worked, of course. Find one that's available, make an offer, put down a deposit, go into escrow, have an inspection. I knew how to do all of that. I just didn't know how to choose a house, especially one that wasn't for me. I lived in a beachfront condo. When you grow up in New England surrounded by woods, the idea of seeing the ocean every day is irresistible. I had underground parking, a doorman, 24-hour concierge service. It was more like a hotel than a home. But it worked for me and was low maintenance. I didn't have to worry about cutting the grass or who was going to get my mail when I had business out of town. The HOA took care of everything. I didn't pick it to impress potential girlfriends, but on the rare occasions I brought one home, it did the trick. But I wasn't shopping for a cool pad with curb appeal this time. I was shopping for a home. It had to be someplace a family would live, warm and inviting, a place to create memories and feel safe. I thought about my childhood house. It was barely more than a mobile home with its leaky aluminum windows and slick vinyl floors. But my mom did her best to make it feel cozy. She sewed curtains from retired bedspreads and disguised our cheap living room furniture with Afghans she crocheted herself. But the thing that really made it feel like a home was the food. There was always something cooking on the stove. When I came home from school, I went straight to the kitchen. Most of our "how was your day" conversations happened when I was burrowing in the refrigerator and Mom was standing over a pot of soup. My condo was vastly superior to the creaky tract home of my childhood, but it always just felt like a place to live. It had a gourmet kitchen, but I rarely used it. My built-in Sub-Zero was stocked with beer and bottled water. I had a Thermador 6-burner range, but I didn't cook, and nobody had cooked for me since I was in high school. A home-cooked meal is an expression of love, and 20 years is a long time to go without one. I started my house search on a real estate site to get a sense of what was available in the neighborhood Holly liked and what it would cost. I had intended to just skim through the listings, but house hunting, even for someone else, was unexpectedly addicting. As I scrolled through pictures of lush yards, sparkling pools, and expansive master suites, I slipped into fantasies of living there myself. Of course, it was absurd. It was just me. What did I need with a 4-bedroom house? I barely used the extra bedroom in my condo. Occasionally, I had friends in from out of town, but mostly I used the neatly made 4-poster bed as a staging area for contracts when I was working on a complicated case. Holly said she only needed 2 bedrooms, but even the smallest houses in the neighborhood she liked had 3 or 4, with at least as many bathrooms. I didn't want her to have to deal with aging plumbing or outdated air conditioning, so I limited my search to new construction or recently remodeled. She wouldn't have the wherewithal to replace a leaky roof, so whatever I got needed to have a new one. I knew the house the moment I saw it. It was elegant but romantic, with beguiling gables and swirls of flowers hugging the front walk. It wasn't new, but the previous owners had completely gutted it, installing new everything: floors, windows, light fixtures, appliances. It was a smart home, which meant it was wired with sensors that would alert the alarm company, and ultimately me if she left the garage door open or if a smoke alarm went off. I had no intention of spying on Holly, but we were paying for the house. If someone was climbing through an open window or the sprinklers stayed on for hours on end, I needed to know about it. But what sealed the deal for me was the kitchen. When I'd asked Holly what kind of house she wanted, she'd mentioned 2 things: Calabasas neighborhood and a cook's kitchen. She wanted a kitchen she could make dinner in, she'd told me, because she cooked every night. The oven needed to be decent, she'd said, because she also liked to bake. This kitchen had 2 ovens, both brand new and top of the line. I called the agent and arranged for a tour. It cost more than I had intended to spend, but I didn't want a house with problems. If something's a bargain, there's usually a reason, and I couldn't afford to run back and forth fixing things. Plus, I wanted her to have something nice. I thought she'd earned that. That I liked the house was irrelevant because she would never invite me over. Once I handed her the keys, I would likely never go inside it again. I took the tour, then immediately made a cash offer. I don't know why I was excited when they accepted it. I wasn't going to live there. I had a perfectly nice place to live, but I suddenly realized I wanted more. Not just a home, but also someone to come home to. But it wasn't my time to dream. I would give Holly the home she deserved, then go back to my HOA and Sub-Zero full of beer. Chapter 23. I was on the freeway when the alarm company called. "Sorry to bother you," the dispatcher said, "but we got a flood alert at your Calabasas home." "What's a flood alert?" I asked. It wasn't raining, so what could be flooding? "Sensors indicate water is pooling inside the house," she said. "An appliance might be leaking or the washing machine could be overflowing. I'm sorry, I don't know. I can't see inside." I thanked her, then hung up the phone to call Holly. It went straight to voicemail. I thought about water pooling somewhere in the house. If it didn't get mopped up soon, it would warp the floorboards, seep into the walls. If not dried out properly, mold could grow, and suddenly we'd have a costly repair and a bunch of insurance adjusters asking a lot of questions. I canceled my plans and headed to the house. Most likely it was nothing, a sensor malfunction or false alarm. Or maybe something had spilled but had already been cleaned up and the sensors needed to be reset. I hadn't walked Holly through all the functions of her smart house. It was probably time I did to avoid these false alarms in the future. I parked across the street, jogged up to the front door and rang the bell. No one answered, so I knocked, gently at first, then more aggressively. "Holly," I said to the closed door. "It's Evan." No answer. I didn't have a key, but I could open the garage with my phone and enter through there. I felt uncomfortable just barging in, but I canceled my day. I wasn't leaving until I was sure nothing was wrong. I walked the curved stone path toward the driveway, which was shaded by trees bursting with vibrant purple flowers. The colorful front yard was one of my favorite things about this house. I loved how in California you could have flowers all year long. I opened the garage. Holly's car was there, and I felt a flutter of nervousness, and not just because I was barging in on her unexpectedly. "It's my fault," I planned to tell her. "I should have told you how your smart features worked, and then hopefully we'd have a laugh." "Holly," I called out as I entered the house. "It's Evan." I started down the hall, making as much noise as I could so as not to startle her. "Hello?" I made my way toward the kitchen. The dispatcher said it was likely a leaky appliance, so I'd check the dishwasher and the washing machine after that. I stepped into the breakfast nook. The kitchen was spotless and nothing was running. I peeked in the cabinet under the double kitchen sink. It was bone dry. I was just about to head into the laundry room when I saw the pill bottle open and on its side. Next to it was a Corningware dinner plate. 6 pills formed a perfect line across the center of it. I picked up the bottle. It was Vicodin, and it was empty. "Holly?" I said loudly. I raced through the dining room, living room, office, and den. Like the kitchen, they were all spotless. I charged the staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time. By the time I reached the top, my pulse was hard and fast as a drum roll. "Holly!" I didn't hear the water running until I was halfway down the hall. The shower was on in the master bathroom. I sprinted toward it. The bathroom door was open. What I saw shattered my heart like a hammer on glass. Holly was lying face down in the shower. Water rained down on her lifeless body, soaking her hair, spattering violently against her waterlogged jeans. She was barefoot but otherwise dressed. The one eye that was visible was closed. Her face was ashen pale. No. I bolted over to her and put 2 fingers to her neck. The icy cold water pummeled me as I searched and prayed for a pulse. And there it was, faint and uneven under my fingertips. "Holly, stay with me," I pleaded as I kicked off the water and dialed 911. Come on, I barked at the phone. We were both soaking wet now. I fumbled for a towel and patted her face. "Hey, I'm going to get you out of here, okay?" Her head rolled lifelessly to one side. Her lips were blue. Panic rose up the back of my neck. I couldn't wait for paramedics. She needed medical attention now. "I'm going to lift you up, okay?" I squatted down beside her and wedged my arms under her body. Her arms and legs drooped toward the floor as I hoisted her up and out of the shower. Adrenaline pulsed through my body as I galloped down the hall. By the time the 911 operator picked up, I was already halfway down the stairs. 911, what's your emergency? The phone was in my back pocket. I couldn't reach it, so I shouted, "I need an ambulance!" Somehow, I'd reached the bottom of the stairs. Holly's wet jeans were slippery, and I struggled to hold on as I beelined for the door. "You've dialed 911. What's your emergency?" The voice repeated. "Forget it. I'll take her myself." I yelled to the dispatcher, who couldn't hear me as I balanced Holly on my raised knee to unlock the front door. A moment later, I was out in the searing hot sunshine, charging across the lawn toward my car. As I wondered how the hell I was going to get her in the back seat, a figure came running out of the house across the street. It was the woman who had brought us cookies. This time, I was glad to see her. "Oh my God, what happened?" she said, hurrying over to me. Holly was blue-lipped and soaking wet. I didn't answer, and she didn't ask again. "Open the car door," I ordered, and she hurried over to my side. The car was locked, but the smart key in my pants pocket chirped and unlocked when she pulled on the door handle. "I'll go around and grab her feet," the neighbor said, and in a flash she had the other door open and was easing Holly's legs across the seat. We clicked a seatbelt around Holly's torso and slammed the doors closed. "What else can I do?" she asked as I jumped behind the wheel. "Find her daughter, Savannah," I said. "Tell her to meet me at the hospital." Then I put the car in gear and floored it.
Andy, 3 months ago. We got ready for bed in silence. Letting go of that diamond felt like someone had died. Not a human being with skin and bones and blood in her veins, but a complex persona that had been meticulously crafted and shaped for almost 40 years. Libby came from money and had a specific vision for her life, our life, that included a showpiece home, luxury cars, first-class travel. These were things she'd always known and assumed she would always have. Having money for ski trips and beach houses and fine jewelry was part of her identity. These things shaped not just how other people saw her, but how she saw herself. It's not that she was a snob or bought stuff to make her feel superior. She simply had always been surrounded by nice things, so she didn't recognize herself without them. She came to the marriage with a rich portfolio, family heirlooms to furnish our apartment on the Upper West Side, a brand new Land Rover for weekend getaways, generous wedding gifts from family friends. My income from the Times was enough to sustain us in the historic one-bedroom walk-up her dad secured for us at below-market rent, and her network of friends provided enough dinner parties to satisfy our cravings for nightlife. Our future was secure, bright even. But I had this crazy dream, and loving me made her passionate for me to pursue it. I knew her to have an adventurous streak, but I also knew she relished the chance to break out of her cocoon, silence her stuffy aunts and concerned mother, who warned her that marrying a writer was a recipe for heartbreak. And so we left our yuppie chic New York life for a chance at fame, fortune, and a self-congratulatory "I told you so." It may not be very liberated of me, but I wanted to take care of Libby in every way, emotionally, physically, and financially. Part of what made me fall in love with her was that she just knew I was destined for greatness. She built me up. She made me feel invincible. Even when things started to go south, she never lost faith. She was like a champion athlete who assumes she can't lose because she never has. Failure was never part of her lexicon, so it didn't seem possible to her, and so it became impossible to me. But today, the impossible became possible. Parting with a cherished family heirloom was like opening the door to failure, pulling out a chair for him and inviting him to stay. Yesterday's Libby would never have done that. Today's Libby was someone else entirely. I watched Libby as she slid her White & Warren featherweight cashmere sweater over her head. Before folding it and putting it away, she inspected it for pills, removing a couple that had formed under the armpits and flicking them into the trash. Yes, she was accustomed to nice things, but she never took them for granted. You rooted for her to have designer threads because she appreciated and took care of them, and took care of herself to look good in them. I understood the temptation to see her as materialistic or shallow, but the possessions she had accumulated over the years were more than things to her. They were intrinsic to who she was, to who she'd always been. Until that day. I thought back to our first date in New York. I took her to a falafel house where everything on the menu was less than $4. The 3 two-top tables and all the seats at the counter were taken, so we ate on a park bench between a crying baby and a homeless man who smelled like soup. I thought I'd never see her again. But 2 days after our ill-conceived date, I got a card in my mailbox thanking me for the delicious adventure. I was stunned. Not that she'd enjoyed the date, the food and conversation were quite good, but by the overt optimism of the gesture. She didn't have to say, "I hope to see you again," because the prompt delivery of her handwritten note said it for her. She was grace personified, even while sandwiched between a malodorous nomad and a crying baby. She had her back to me as she slipped out of her bra and into her satin pajamas. She was no less graceful, but the sheen of optimism she once so effortlessly radiated had been worn away. It sounds hyperbolic, and she would never, ever say it, but part of her died that day. I only hoped I could bring her back to life. Chapter 24. "I think we should move back to New York," Libby said when I got back from my impromptu meeting with my agent. Since the deadline had passed and Jack hadn't called, I didn't want to waste even a minute finding a new potential buyer for my script, so I hauled my ass down to Beverly Hills to talk to Laura in person. Everyone who works at a Hollywood talent agency, from the top dog down to the guy who sorts the mail, wears a suit, so I dressed up a little, in flat front trousers and a button-down shirt. Agents don't expect clients to dress as well as they do, but I always felt self-conscious standing among them if I looked like a schlub. They had parking in the building, so I wore my dress shoes, too. Normally it takes my agent a week to put a list of potential buyers together for a pitch or a script, but I made her do it while I waited. She was not optimistic about the script's prospects. This guy doesn't do big-budget action. That guy already overspent this year. But by the end of the meeting, she had a slim list and promised to try. I stopped for coffee and a sandwich on the way home. I didn't want to be hungry and frazzled when I saw Libby. It would be hard enough to feign optimism even with a full stomach and fully caffeinated. But it wouldn't have mattered if I came home whistling Dixie. She had made up her mind. She wanted to leave LA. She had given up on me. I do this silly thing when I have to make a tough decision. I flip a coin. Not to make the decision for me, but to see how I really feel. Heads, we stay in California and keep grinding. Tails, we cut our losses and go back to our families and lives we once knew. I flipped a coin in my mind and pretended it came up tails. Leave California. I should have felt relief. My career was agonizing, and I had no real prospects. But I didn't feel relieved. I felt despair. I was an addict, and I didn't want to give up my drug, even if it would heal my finances and my marriage. But it wasn't only up to me. As a screenwriter, I was also a salesman. I pumped myself up to make one last pitch. "I had a good meeting with Laura today," I said, a little too brightly. "She's sending out the spec. There's still a chance it could sell." I tried not to sound like a desperate Willy Loman, but acting was never my forte, and she wasn't convinced.
"It's not just that," she started. "Something happened while you were gone."
Her lips started to quiver. Libby was not easily rattled. I suddenly got scared. "What happened?" I asked. She sucked in her cheeks like she was trying not to cry. "Lib, what is it?" I coaxed. Her hands were shaking. I pulled out a chair for her, but she waved it off.
"I think Holly tried to kill herself,"
she finally blurted, and then she started to cry. She told me about seeing Evan carrying Holly's limp body out of the house and how she ran outside to help him. She described how she'd taken hold of Holly's cold, pruny feet and how she pulled on them to get her into Evan's back seat.
"She had us all over to dinner, and I didn't even say thank you."
She was sobbing hard now. I reached for her and pulled her close. "Okay, first of all, we all said thank you, and her pain has nothing to do with you. So don't go there," I said into her hair. I realized I had no second of all, so I just held her and let her cry.
"It's just not working out how I thought," she finally said.
And I knew her despair was not just about Holly.
"I think we'd have a better life back in New York."
I thought about going back to a cramped apartment in the city, and to a job that forced me to live out of suitcases for months at a time. I thought about trading my car for a Metro card, and cramming into the subway when I couldn't get a cab. But mostly I thought about having to tell all my family and friends that the grand California adventure was a failure. That I was a failure. That I had failed my wife. I was about to try to put this conversation off, say something like, "Let's talk about it when you're not so upset," when my phone rang in my pocket. I looked at her for the okay to answer it. She nodded. "Go ahead." I pulled out my phone and looked at the caller ID. It was my agency. I got a little dopamine rush like I always do as I answered. "This is Andy?" An assistant told me. "I have Laura for you," and a moment later my agent clicked on. Her words were like a dam breaking. I had to lean against the wall to keep from being toppled by the tidal wave of emotions that slammed through my chest, shock and disbelief, followed by a blast of pure euphoria. I turned to look at Libby. Her brows were frozen in perplexed anticipation. "Jack Kimball wants to buy my script," I said. Her hand flew over her mouth. She looked unsure, so I assured her. "I sold a movie," I said. "The offer came in 5 minutes ago." We looked at each other in stunned silence. And then we did something we hadn't done for a very long time. We held each other, and we laughed.
Holly, 3 months ago. I couldn't sleep, so I got up and ran a bath. The hot water wasn't good for my inflamed knee, but neither was insomnia, and I thought soaking in the tub might quiet my mind. As scalding water poured out of the tap, I let my tears mingle with the steamy air to camouflage my grief. But it didn't work, because grief isn't like sadness. Sadness is thick, like a heavy fog that clouds your vision so you can't see any of the good things around you. But grief is something else. It's not fog. It's a storm. It rages inside you, tearing at your organs, pulling at your heart, lungs, skin, until they feel like they're going to rip wide open, exposing the most delicate parts of you, leaving them bloody and raw. Grief is savage, like love. I think maybe it's the same thing as love. It's love that is trapped inside you, a bird that can't spread its wings, so it flaps violently in protest until it's exhausted and broken and utterly without hope. No, grief is not sadness. It's love that is desperately, urgently lost, an intense longing that pools in your lungs and balls up in your throat, so that when you try to talk, it just pours out of you like sludge. I understood now why grieving people turned to God. I didn't go to church anymore, but I read enough of the Bible to know God's capacity to receive love is limitless. He could absorb all that grief-stricken love and bounce it back at you, filling you up, making you whole again. When I was a kid growing up in the desert of Bakersfield, I used to daydream of living in the woods, surrounded by streams and pine trees that stretched halfway to heaven. I never loved the white-hot heat of the West. If God gave me a second chance, I hoped it would be far away from here, in that emerald forest of my dreams. Of course, I didn't deserve a second chance. I was a lying, criming, worthless whore. I had just lost the only person who would have understood why I did what I'd done, and the only person good and kind enough to forgive me. I was all alone now. No one could help me. I couldn't share myself with anyone because no one could know what I really was. And so I sank down into the bath and I prayed. Chapter 25. I suddenly realized I didn't want to die. The timing of this realization was rather unfortunate because I had just taken 12 Vicodin and I'd likely be dead within the hour. I was already starting to feel the effect. I was lying on my bed, a beautiful California king with a tufted headboard and sheets from Ralph Lauren, but couldn't feel any part of my body touching it. My arms, legs, head, and torso all felt like they were floating. It was a very pleasant feeling, how you might feel if you were made entirely out of whipped cream. I almost laughed at my predicament. Because until 15 minutes ago, when I swallowed all those pills, I could have easily gone on living without doing anything at all. But now, in order not to die, I was going to have to work very hard to stay alive. Savannah once asked me what irony was. I remember struggling to explain it. Irony is one of those concepts that is hard to define, except by giving an example of it, and at the time, I couldn't for the life of me think of one. Discovering I wanted to live right when I was about to die, now there's irony for you. I made a mental note, in the unlikely event I ever saw Savannah again, to offer this moment as an example. I don't know if being so close to death was what made me want to live, or if it was something else entirely. Maybe I suddenly wanted to live because, for the first time in over 3 months, every cell in my body didn't hurt like hell. Vicodin will do that for you. Turns out that when you're not in the chokehold of debilitating pain, being alive doesn't completely suck. I'd kind of forgotten that. The Vicodin-induced full-body numbness had the unexpected side effect of refreshing my memory. Riding my opioid raft toward death gave me a brash new perspective on things. I felt a surge of pride. I had been hit by a car and survived. I'd had my kneecap removed with a straw and learned to walk again. I lived in a house nice enough to be in a magazine. I had a luxury SUV, a great new haircut, and an oven that produced the most perfectly crumbly blueberry scones you've ever tasted. I had a beautiful, caring daughter who made me proud every day. Why on earth would I want to die? I had a great life. Now all I had to do was figure out how to save it. In order to not die, I was going to need some medical help, which meant getting to a hospital. If I'd had my phone, I could have called 911, but I'd left it downstairs because I had planned on being dead, and you don't need a phone when you don't have a pulse. I felt myself start to nod off. I knew if I fell asleep, it was game over, so I forced my eyes open. I told myself I had to get up. My legs were numb, but I managed to swing them off the side of the bed. I couldn't feel my feet, but I could see with my eyes that they had made contact with the floor. Progress. I tried to stand, but wound up in a crumpled heap. Okay, so walking is out of the question, but maybe I can crawl? I maneuvered myself onto hands and knees. I had never seen my carpet so close up. It was really pretty. The vanilla-colored Berber with pebbles of brown looked like pralines and cream. I imagined licking it. Not now. Maybe later. I realized if I was going to go in search of medical help, I needed to wake up a bit. A little cold water on my face might do the trick, and great news, the bathroom was within crawling distance. Hand, foot, I bear crawled toward the bathroom. My eyesight was getting a little blurry, but I knew I'd reached the bathroom when cold tile replaced scratchy wool under my palms. I didn't think I could crawl into the tub, but the shower was an option, and that was even closer. My legs were getting really heavy now, but I was a badass widow and the baker of the world's best scones. What did I need with legs? I could G.I. Joe crawl my way to the shower, and that's exactly what I did. On my knees, I was tall enough to reach the faucet handle. I turned it all the way cold, then yanked it as hard as I could. Water tumbled down on me. I couldn't really feel it, but I could see it, and I lay back under the spray. It was glorious, but it didn't wake me up. I felt my head separate from my body. For several seconds, I was hovering above myself. Then I was in a field with tall grass in every direction. The sky was every color: white, green, blue, yellow. I was riding a rainbow across a sparkly, starry sky. It was absolutely glorious. I thought for a moment this might be heaven. In my mind's eye, I was smiling. Because wherever I was in God's hands. He would take all that love that was bottled up inside me, and he would set me free.
Evan, 3 months ago. I went to Holly's apartment to tell her I'd found a house. We never talked on the phone. I didn't want there to be a trail of phone records linking us together, so all our conversations were in person. This probably seems extreme, but so were the circumstances. I had to take every possible precaution. I thought about bringing flowers, but then thought better of it. She wasn't my friend. I would be well advised to keep our relationship as transactional as possible. Holly's apartment was an older building called Le Chateau. It amused me when these low-end apartments had fancy names. Who do they think they are fooling? I was a little bit shocked to discover her building didn't have an elevator. My heart pinged with shame as I imagined her hauling her bum leg up 3 flights of stairs. I made a mental note to find a physical therapist who would come to her. I dressed down for the visit, in track pants and a sweatshirt. I didn't want to call attention to myself. I left the Yale hat at home, opting for a Dodger blue one instead. I knocked on the door with no idea what I would do if she wasn't home or still in bed. I hadn't called, couldn't call, and I didn't feel like camping out on the stairs all day. But she surprised me by answering almost immediately. I must have looked surprised because she said, "I was in the kitchen making breakfast." She let me in and pointed to the couch. Not a couch, actually, but a futon with a blanket draped over it, similar to the one I'd had in my college dorm room. I sat as instructed. Her apartment was neat and homey and painfully small. Her furniture was cheap, but not ratty. Pictures of Savannah crowded the walls, school portraits, Savannah on ice skates, in a dance leotard, on a horse. Sitting there, I recalled the flimsy wood paneling and worn parquet floors of my childhood home. I hadn't realized what a dump it was until I moved out. I wondered if Holly would have the same revelation. "I made an offer on a home I think you'll like," I began. I had thought she would want to hear about it, but she dismissed the conversation with a wave of her hand. "I'm sure it's fine. I don't need to see it, not now." She was agitated. Her mouth was pinched. She was in pain. "Thank you for trusting me," I said, hoping she would glean the double meaning. I wasn't just talking about the house. She looked at me intently, and I knew she understood. "Where's my car?" she asked. I told her I'd had it towed, that we would get her a new one whenever she wanted. She shook her head. That's not why she asked. "What are you doing with it?" she pressed, and I felt some relief, because I realized she didn't want to get caught any more than we did. "Dismantling it," I said simply. Since it was operable and parked at the time of the accident, the police had just left it there. So Jack asked a guy who worked on his movies, a teamster who likely had mob connections, to get rid of it. And for $1,000, he did, no questions asked. "The police asked me where the car was. I said I didn't know," she said, and I read between the lines. "So don't tell me." I nodded. I understood. I kind of wished I didn't know either. "I have to rest now," she said abruptly. Her head was still bandaged, but the bruising had gone down. I had a sudden urge to hug her, but I didn't, of course. "I think you'll really like the house," I offered. I don't know why this was so important to me. It clearly wasn't important to her. "The only thing I care about is Savannah," she said. I nodded. I suddenly wondered what it would be like to have someone to only care about. The closest I ever came to putting someone's needs before my own was working for Jack, but he paid me for that. I was loyal to him because that was my job. "We're taking every precaution," I assured her. She opened the door for me. As I took one last glance around the meager apartment, at her dorm room futon and aging TV, I realized just how little she had. But she had something I didn't. She had someone to only care about. Something bigger than her pain, her needs, even her loss. And I envied her for that. Chapter 26. It was a 14-minute drive to the hospital, but I did it in 8. There would probably be a warrant out for my arrest once I got there after all the red lights I ran, but I didn't think about that. All I could think about was Holly not dying. The neighbor and I had slid her in on her side so her front was facing out, but when I took the speed bumps in her neighborhood at 50 miles per hour, she bounced onto her back. I knew that was dangerous, that she could choke on her own tongue, but I didn't dare stop, not even to readjust her. The first 2 red lights I ran were in residential neighborhoods, so I didn't bother to slow down. The third one was a little scarier. When the cars in front of me stopped at the intersection, I swerved into the left turn lane, leaned on my horn, and barreled past them. I don't know if it was a sound strategy or I was just lucky, but we came out the other side in one piece, so I did it 2 more times. When I finally saw the American flag flying high in front of the hospital, I became a horse running for the barn. The earth could have parted in front of me, and even that would not have stopped me. I screeched to a stop in front of the ambulance's only entrance and jumped out of the car. I didn't recognize the sound of my own voice when I screamed, "Help! Somebody help me!" I tore the car door open and lurched for Holly's seatbelt. She had rolled over onto it, and I had to lift her torso with one hand to free the buckle. I hooked my arms under her armpits, and as I dragged her body across the seat, a security guard shouted at me, "Hold on, I'll get a gurney." I couldn't wait for a gurney. Holly's face was white as chalk. I flipped her over and hoisted her fireman style over my shoulder. The double doors swung open as I approached, and I charged through them like a man possessed. "Lay her down here," an orderly commanded as he wheeled a gurney toward us. I eased her down onto her butt, and he guided her shoulders onto the bed. Her lifeless legs were dangling off the side, so I gently swung them up and laid them straight. "Did she drown?" the man asked, searching her wrist for a pulse. There was so much adrenaline coursing through my body I'd forgotten we were both soaking wet. "Overdose," I told him. "Found her in the shower." He pressed a button and another set of doors opened. I followed him as he pushed her through. A doctor in scrubs jogged over to us. He looked like a frat boy barely out of college with his shaggy hair and shiny pink cheeks. He took the stethoscope from around his neck and pressed it to her chest. "Vicodin," I said helplessly. "I don't know how many." I could feel a lump forming in my chest. This was my fault. The deal we made was my idea. I did this to her. If she died, it would be because I killed her. "Pulse is 115, breathing is shallow," he said to a nurse who had appeared out of nowhere. He shone a pen light in her eyes. "Let's start with 0.4 milligrams of Narcan IV push. Repeat every 10 minutes until she becomes responsive. Get RT to prepare a ventilator in case her respiratory effort doesn't improve. Place a nasogastric tube for gastric lavage. And send a toxicology screen, acetaminophen level, and liver panel to test for hepatotoxicity." The nurse nodded and started wheeling her away. I tried to follow. The doctor stopped me with his hand. "You the husband?" he asked, and for a second I almost said yes. "No," I replied. "We're not married." I realized my answer implied that we were together. In a way, we were, bound by something much more permanent than marriage. "The Narcan should stabilize her," he said matter-of-factly. "But we'll need to do some tests to know the extent of any organ damage once we remove any remaining tablets from her stomach." I repeated the words in my head. Should stabilize her. Do some tests. "What kind of organ damage?" I asked. "Her pupils were responsive, so brain function looks good," he said robotically, like he was talking about a science experiment, not a human life. "But toxicity in the liver is a concern. She's not out of the woods yet." I didn't know I was crying until a tear rolled onto my lip. It was in that moment that I realized somehow, and completely unexpectedly, Holly had become my somebody to only care about. And I didn't know what the hell I would do if I lost her.
This is the end of disc number 4. Please insert disc number 5. This is disc number 5.
Andy, 3 months ago. The blank page is a wondrous thing. Many writers fear it. They hate starting a new project. They procrastinate for days, weeks, or even forever. But I love the blank page. I love being in a state of boundless possibility. I love the reminder that, even as a mere human, I have the ability to create whole worlds. Writing is a superpower. Writers conjure human emotions, horror, sadness, exhilaration, despair, simply by arranging words on a page. Churning up a person's emotions is a great responsibility, and I have never taken it lightly. When I was just starting out as a writer, I had the audacity to think that what I was creating with my words came from me. I thought the ideas, images, and stories that popped into my head were mine, that my brain had generated them, that I was some sort of wizard. But now I know that the ability to create is a very different kind of gift. When I write, I am not manufacturing, as one might do in a factory or a lab. I am receiving. My job is not to mine my mind for characters, it's to ask them to visit me, then completely surrender to them. Writing is listening. It's spiritual, in the sense that what I write is not of me, but rather flows through me. Flipping on my computer and greeting the blank page is an act of surrender, like saying a prayer, then humbly trusting in God's sacred gift. That's not to say there's no craft involved in writing a book or a script. What I receive is not fully formed. I have to pair the images that flow into my head with words, then shape those words into beautiful sentences, and those sentences into a coherent narrative with a beginning, middle, and end. Creating is a dance with the divine. The blank page is the invitation. The ideas are the invited guests. I use words to wrangle them. It requires skill and faith in equal measure. Some writing teachers will tell you, if you want to be a writer, you need to write every day. But I don't agree with that. You need life experiences to understand what you're receiving, otherwise you can't authentically transcribe them. You can't create emotional content without experiencing emotions. Original stories are a tangle of what is divinely offered to you, and everything you've learned, felt, observed, experienced. Put more simply, you need to breathe in to breathe out. Living is breathing in. Putting words on the page is breathing out. I always take a moment when I sit down in front of the blank page to give thanks for what I'm about to receive. I make a silent promise to listen and to trust, and then I let it flow. As I brought my fingers to the keyboard to begin the script that would either keep me in the game or be the end of this grand experiment, I reminded myself to open my heart, because if I didn't write from my heart, I would have nothing. I took a big breath in, then one long, glorious breath out. And my fingers began to type. Chapter 27. The contract arrived in my inbox when Libby was making dinner. I scrolled through it. It was just a first draft, but I was encouraged that they'd sent it so quickly, because it signaled they were serious about getting to work. At this stage, there were no guarantees my script would get made into a film, but Laura was going to try and negotiate a penalty if it didn't, which she hoped would increase the chances that it would. I wasn't getting paid in full yet, but the option fee was fair, and I would get that money right away. I also got a guaranteed writing step, which meant they would pay me to get the script ready for production, giving me a portion up front and the rest when I finished. The two fees combined amounted to a little over $100,000, enough to feed and house us well into next year. My eventual payday, if Jack moved forward with the movie, was almost 7 figures. This was more than get the girls back in dance lessons money. It was life-changing. It was pay off the mortgage and get Libby's diamond back money. And I was going to do everything in my power to get it. "Guess what I just got from Jack Kimball?" I called out to my wife, waving my iPad in the air, open to the contract. It was taco night. Libby was scooping out avocados to make guacamole, and she had a fleck of green mash on her nose. "Chlamydia?" she guessed, then laughed at her own joke. "It was only our first date," I joked back. "I'm not that kind of guy."
"Let's see it," she demanded, as she wiped her hands on a towel.
As she went to grab the iPad, I pulled it back out of her reach. She narrowed her eyes. "I don't have to take the deal," I teased. "We can still go back to New York. It's not too late."
"You know I never really wanted to go back to New York," she said.
And I knew she was telling the truth, because she had an even bigger ego than I did. The last thing she wanted was to give her dad an opportunity to say, "I told you so." I passed her the iPad. Her hand floated over her mouth.
"That's almost,"
she started, but then stopped herself, like she was afraid to say the words, so I said them for her. $1 million, I said, "but only if they make the movie." And they very rarely make the movie. The odds were 1 in 1,000. But I didn't tell her that. I wanted her to enjoy the moment. She'd earned it.
"Of course they're going to make the movie," she insisted, and I just smiled. "It's brilliant, just like you."
She threw her arms around me, then grabbed my face and kissed me hard on the mouth.
"I'm so proud of you," she said,
her voice cracking with emotion. And then she suddenly frowned.
"How'd you get avocado on your nose?"
"From your nose," I told her. She looked at her reflection in a butter knife, and then she laughed.
"Oh dear."
She reached for a towel, wiped my nose, and then her own. Her smile made me feel light on my feet. I couldn't remember the last time I felt buoyant like that. And in that moment, I realized just how bleak the last 12 months had been.
"Where do we sign?" she asked,
Eagerly scrolling through the document. Her face was lit with excitement, and I almost cried with happiness. The old Libby was back. "This is just a draft," I said. "My lawyer has to mark it up. It's going to be a while." Her face lit up.
"So you could get even more."
I hadn't thought about that. It was unlikely, but I didn't want to burst her bubble. "Yeah, I guess I could." She got to the end of the document, then suddenly got quiet. Her eyebrows crunched into little caterpillars. Something was wrong. "What's that face?" I asked. She looked confused, and for a second I worried that maybe it wasn't real, that the meeting, the offer, all of it had just been one big joke. The thought of moving back to New York with my tail between my legs suddenly reared up like a painful memory, filling me with the dull ache of dread. She turned the iPad to face me. She had scrolled to the signature page. No one had signed it yet, but this was normal. It was only a draft. Is that what she's so concerned about? That he hasn't signed it? "He'll sign it when it's final," I assured her, "and then I will too." She shook her head and pointed to the section where Jack was supposed to sign and date. "What?" I still didn't get it. Her eyebrows arched up like a cat stretching its back.
"Look at the company name," she prodded.
I squinted at the signature line, at the name of the LLC that was hiring me. Jack Kimball's LLC. Happy Accident Enterprises, I read aloud. Again the cat eyebrows.
"Don't you remember?"
I shook my head. I had no idea what she was talking about. She clucked her tongue, closed the contract, and opened the browser. A few clicks later, she was on the LA County website. She showed me the public record for the house across the street, Holly's house. She pointed at the name listed as the owner. Happy Accident Enterprises, I read again. But this time my tongue stumbled on the words. Our eyes met. I had a prickly feeling on my arms.
Does that mean what I think it means? She asked.
I nodded as I spoke aloud what she already knew. Jack Kimball owns Holly's house. Her mouth drifted open.
But how? I mean, why? What possible connection could Jack Kimball have to Holly?
I shook my head. I had no idea. But I had a sudden pressing urge to find out.
Part 4. Savannah, 3 months ago. What is a human life worth? We learned in 10th grade U.S. history that all men are created equal. But everyone knows that's complete horseshit. An accomplished life is worth more than a do-nothing life. A healthy life is worth more than a sickly life. Young lives are worth more than tired, old lives. Dad always said we're all equal in the eyes of God, but if that's true, it must be God's best-kept secret, because we sure don't treat each other that way. I was back in the smelly police cruiser, on my way to the scene of the accident, which also happened to be the street where I lived. When I told Officer Kellogg I left something important in my mom's car, I had thought he would say no, he couldn't take me. It was an active crime scene. I'd have to wait. But he must have felt sorry for me, because here I was on my way there. Other than the occasional crackle of the police radio, we rode in silence. The North Valley neighborhood we were traversing was not LA's finest. As we turned eastward toward my neighborhood, I peered out at long strings of homeless encampments, dotted with colorful tents and walled off by shopping carts. As I took in the filth and sadness of my neighbors, I asked myself again, what is a human life worth? I pondered Fancy Suit Man's offer. If I sold him the video and our silence along with it, that meant we could never sue him or the asswipe who sent him. When cases like ours go to trial, in order to decide the amount of an award, a jury has to determine the value of what was lost. So once again I had to ask, what is a human life worth? Or, more specifically, what was my dad's life worth? Dad never made a lot of money, but he took care of us in every way. He did everything dads do, from servicing the car and keeping the internet on, to cheering me on at track meets and consoling me with milkshakes when the cheering didn't work. He taught me how to surf, how to play Jingle Bells on the guitar, and how to light a campfire without any matches. He bought me dumb gifts like rainbow socks, each toe a different color, and a puzzle with my face on it. And, with the exception of the time he invited a puppy that wasn't house-trained to stay at our apartment for 3 weeks, he made my mom really happy. It was not just my dad's life that was part of the calculation here. Fancy Suit Man was protecting someone. If the video was as incriminating as we both assumed, someone worth a whole lot more than my dad would likely be going to jail. So, what was that guy's life worth? This was becoming a very complicated equation. Mom and I didn't need much, but we definitely needed help, because Mom couldn't pay the bills from her hospital bed. And we'd need a lot more money than I could make working at the mall. Of course, we could get nothing if the police had already found the camera. Most likely they had. They were detectives. Collecting evidence was kind of their job. But if they hadn't, why couldn't I take it? It was mine after all. Dad bought it for me. You could say it was wrong, but you could also say I had every right. There were a handful of cop cars and twice as many people standing guard at the crime scene when we pulled up. We parked across the street from my building, and suddenly, I couldn't move. I peered out at the street where my dad had taken his last breath. These buildings, trees, sky, were the last things he ever saw. How could I ever come here without thinking, this is where my dad died. This is where my dad died. This is where my dad died. On endless repeat. My vision blurred as panic attacked like 1,000 knives stabbing me at once. I was about to shout, forget it. I can't do this. Let's just go. When I heard a man laugh. Who the fuck is laughing? I looked out the window to see 2 cops, leaning against their cruiser, smiling and joking like this was some ordinary day. These guys didn't care about my dad. His death was just business as usual for them. In that moment, I knew if I wanted any chance of getting what my dad's life was worth, however much that was, I'd have to go and get it myself. Kellogg opened the door for me. You ready, kid? I answered by sucking up my rage and getting out of the car. If there was evidence to be found, I wanted to find it. If there was a deal to be made, I wanted to be the one making it. The hot midday sun blasted the asphalt under my feet as I walked toward the Cherokee. I saw dark polyester pit stains under Kellogg's arms as he raised the yellow police tape so I could slip underneath. It's okay, I heard him say to someone who wasn't me. She's family. I shielded my eyes from what I knew lay just beyond the car. Shattered glass, a crumpled door, little orange cones to mark the spots where bits of evidence might be, and kept my focus on the Cherokee. Just look at the car, Savannah. Just look at the car. The driver's side door had been removed, so I had a clear line of sight into the car. I glanced at the rearview mirror, where my dad had clipped the golf ball-sized camera, and saw that it was gone. My heart sank. Mom and I were in the hands of the justice system now, a system that would screw us like it always screwed people like us. I didn't know how many eyes were watching me, but I could feel a lot of them. It would look suspicious if, after making Kellogg drive me all the way across town, I didn't take something. I looked down at the floor mat. Mom's keychain had fallen beside the brake pedal. A little troll with neon green hair. It was a stupid thing to take, but I figured it could pass as something with sentimental value, a trinket to remember my dad by. I crouched down to pick it up. As my fingers closed around the pudgy figurine, something under the seat caught my eye. It was so dark down there, I almost didn't see it. The interior of the Jeep was inky black, just like the dash cam, which had fallen off the mirror and was right there for the taking. As I slipped the little black golf ball that would blow up our lives into my sleeve, I thought about Mom. She would never agree to the man's obscene offer, but she was unconscious, so it was kind of up to me. Hit and run was a crime, and Mom would want justice. She'd say Dad deserved it, but justice wouldn't bring my dad back. And sending some rich guy to jail would not solve our problems, but his money would. As I walked away from the scene with our future up my sleeve, I once again wondered, what is a human life worth? It appeared we were about to find out. Mom wouldn't like what I did, but I was her only daughter. She would forgive me. It never occurred to me that she might not forgive herself. Chapter 28. I should have paid more attention to her. I was so jazzed about having a boyfriend, I completely forgot about my mom. I forgot that her knee hurt every time she took a step. I forgot that her best friend and constant companion had been violently taken from her. I forgot that she was alone, all day, every day. I tried not to cry the whole ride to the hospital, but I couldn't stop. Libby hadn't said the word suicide. She didn't have to. Her face was so puffy when Logan and I pulled up to the house. I knew she'd been crying. She cried again as she described helping Evan load Mom's floppy body into the car. She'd tried to sound hopeful that everything was going to be okay, which was supposed to make me feel better, but only made me feel worse. Because if everything truly is going to be okay, you don't have to say it. And if she'd truly believed it, she wouldn't have been crying so hard. Libby had offered to drive me to the hospital, but Logan had insisted. I was a blubbering mess, but he didn't say anything. He didn't even look at me. At one point, he tried to hold my hand, but I didn't hold his back, so he let go. I had thought my dad dying was the worst thing that could ever happen to me, but Dad's death was an accident. If Mom died, it would be my fault. I would have killed her with my selfishness. I know kids sometimes think it's their fault when something bad happens to a parent, but in this case, it would be true. I should have known something was wrong when she didn't show up to the meet. She always came to my meets. She's not one of those moms who pushes her way to the front row and shouts, come on, during my races. But she's always there, at the top of the bleachers, watching and silently rooting for me. But today, for the first time, she hadn't come. And I, for the first time, barely even noticed. Maybe it was the money that changed me. I used to be a decent human being, caring and respectful. Now I was trash. They say money corrupts. I was a blatant case in point. I thought back to our old life, the one when we were poor. We couldn't afford designer anything or sit-down sushi restaurants, but my life somehow still felt full. I would have preferred not to have to buy someone else's previously loved jeans and sweaters, but thrifting wasn't so bad. Mom turned it into a game. Who can get the biggest haul for $50? I always won. There wasn't a prize, except the satisfaction of telling Dad I'd outshopped Mom again. We had a lot less, but we had a lot more too. More time together, more laughs, more just being ourselves. I suddenly realized money can't buy happiness, but it sure as shit can take it away. I thought Logan would just drop me off, but he parked and came inside with me. Mom had been admitted and was in a private room. We walked there in silence. I was too disgusted with myself to speak. And what do you say to a girl who drove her own mother to try to kill herself? Logan liked me now, but if he knew what a monster I was, he would dump me like rotten milk. Mom's door was open. She was sleeping. She had a tube up her nose and looked really pale. I wanted to run toward her and run away, both at the same time, so I just stood there like a dumbass. I knew from what Libby told us that Evan was the one who found her, so it made sense that he would be there, sitting by the bed. He seemed to be watching her sleep. I couldn't decide if it was sweet or creepy, but who am I to judge? He stood up when he saw me. "Savannah," he said, "I am so sorry." I started to cry, because I was the one who should be apologizing. He looked like he wanted to hug me, and I wasn't sure how I felt about that. He had saved my mom's leg, and now her life. All this time, I'd needed him to be the enemy, but what if it turned out he was something very different? "Hi, I'm Logan," Logan announced. "Savannah's boyfriend." There was a tense beat of silence, or maybe I was just imagining it, because I knew I didn't deserve a boyfriend, and maybe Evan knew it too. "Evan," he said. "I'm a family friend." Evan took a step back so I could take the place by my mom's bedside. "We'll leave you alone with her," he said kindly, and I saw he was looking at Logan. "You want to be alone with her, babe?" Logan asked, and I wasn't sure, but I nodded. I remembered the last time my mom was in the hospital, how I had crawled into bed beside her. I'd stayed all night like that, protecting her as she protected me. But I had failed her. I didn't deserve her company or her comfort. I put my face close to hers. "I'm so sorry, Mommy," I said into her cheek. But she didn't stir. I grabbed her hand. "I'm here now." I was so close to her, I could almost hear her heartbeat. I squeezed my eyes shut in silent prayer. "Please, God, I'll give everything back. Please just make her well," I prayed. Not with my words, but with my heart. I laid my head down beside her and waited for God's answer to my prayer.
Libby, 3 months ago. "Can I get as many toppings as I want?" Margot asked, gazing upon the colorful bins of candy at the self-serve frozen yogurt place on the boulevard. I didn't feel comfortable spending what it would cost to go to the other happiest place on earth. But the girls were long overdue for a special treat, so Froyo would have to do. They loved watching the creamy confection ooze out of the machine, and that they could pull the lever themselves. And we all marveled at the exotic list of flavors: German chocolate cake, lemon chiffon, red velvet cheesecake, and made sure to try them all. "Absolutely," I replied. The assortment of toppings was staggering. Gummy worms, Oreos, strawberries, kiwis, chocolate fudge. It was every dentist's worst nightmare. "As many toppings as you want." "Even if it costs more?" I heard nervousness in my daughter's voice, and my heart broke a little. My parents never worried about money. We lived in a nice house with plenty of room for our family of 5. My sisters and I never fought over the bathroom because we each had our own. My mom had a study for reading, a music room for practicing her piano, and a dressing room with so many shoes she needed a ladder to reach them all. When things got old, car, television, living room furniture, we replaced them. My parents sometimes haggled over details: what color, how big, leather or velvet, but never about how much it cost. Everything was decided based on what we liked. Should we rent a ski house in Aspen or Stowe? Should we visit Barbados or Greece? Should we buy a Mercedes or a BMW? It was never, well, what's cheaper? Only, what do you prefer? Most people would probably consider me spoiled. I understand now that it's not normal to always have whatever you want, but I never knew anything different. My sisters and I were not ungracious. We said thank you and helped around the house. But we were never denied things we wanted because they were too expensive. I was never afraid of being broke, because having to worry about money was not real to me. Until it was. Since Andy's career went cold, every choice I made about what to buy was about how much it cost. I chose the spaghetti that cost 99 cents over the one that was $1.79. I bought no-name brands, clipped coupons, and watched for sales. Every purchase was a calculation. If something wasn't a good value, I didn't buy it. This was new for me. I used to have people to help me around the house, but we couldn't afford that anymore. The first person we let go was our once-a-week housekeeper. I did all the laundry now, mopped the floors, scrubbed the toilets. Not long after we let Rosa go, we reduced our gardener from once a week to once a month. He mowed the lawn and trimmed the trees. I didn't have the tools for that, and I weeded the garden and raked the pine needles and leaves. We stopped going to restaurants and Disneyland. I became the art teacher, and dance lessons were put on hold. It didn't upset me to have to do these things, yet I felt unhappy. I just didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't recognize the thoughts I was having. I'll wait for it to go on sale. Maybe it's cheaper online. Or some of the things I said to my daughters. You can wear that dress again. No, we're not buying raspberries. Who was this person? I wasn't someone who tells her children they can't have raspberries, or sells her jewelry to pay for food. But people change. Sometimes for the better, sometimes not. When it comes to ice cream, we get whatever we want, I told my daughter. Then silently wondered what happened to the me I used to know. Chapter 29. I knew I should bring a gift, but what do you bring a woman who just tried to kill herself? Obviously not a bottle of wine, that would be macabre. And she was such a good baker she didn't need my cookies. Plus, I'd already done that, when I thought there was a man around the house to eat them. Flowers seemed inappropriate. Nobody died, thank God. And she had brought me that beautiful orchid. I didn't want to be a copycat. The old me would have known exactly what to bring. I used to be confident about these things and about myself. But I had grown to question everything, from what to bring to a sick friend to what kind of person I had become. I decided on a fruit basket. Everybody likes fruit. It's sweet and colorful and doesn't make you fat. I packed the basket myself, with apples, pears, kiwis, grapes, and tangerines, best I could do given the season, then wrapped it in plastic and secured it with a cheery yellow ribbon. I waited until late morning, when I knew Savannah would be in school, then walked across the street and rang the bell. Holly had only been home from the hospital for a few hours, but I didn't want her to be alone that first day back. I wanted her to know she had friends who cared about her, who she could talk to. Yes, I was curious why my husband's A-list employer owned her house, but I would not bring it up. I wanted her to feel supported, not judged. So I would stifle my curiosity and just be her friend. Holly answered the door wearing baggy USMC sweatpants and a plain white t-shirt. Without makeup, she looked so young. If her daughter had looked anything like her, they could have passed for sisters. "I brought you some fruit," I said, and she smiled a little, like people do when they are too embarrassed to say anything. "I know you probably need to rest, but I didn't want you to be alone today," I added by way of apology, but also so she would know I was not about to let her do this again. Savannah had texted me that the blood work showed no permanent damage, but she would be suffering from what felt like a really bad hangover for at least a couple of days. "That's so kind of you," Holly said, eyeing the shiny red apples and twirls of green grapes. Then she got suddenly sad. "I can't imagine what you must think of me." "I can't imagine what you must think of me," I said, redirecting all shame and regret onto myself. "I knew you were going through a difficult time, and I wasn't there for you. I'm a terrible friend. Forgive me." She twisted her hair with a nervous finger as she met my gaze. "I just put some coffee on," she started, and I couldn't tell if she wanted to invite me in or get rid of me. "If you want to be alone, I would of course understand," I said in a tone that suggested leaving her alone was not an option. "But you don't have to be," I continued. "I put my favorite pears in that basket without saving any for myself. They would go great with that coffee you were making." Okay, not very subtle, but I really didn't want her to send me away. "If you don't mind me looking like this," she said, indicating her makeup-less face. I smiled with relief. "Are you kidding? You look absolutely radiant," I countered. "If I had skin like yours, I wouldn't wear a scrap of makeup, ever." And now her smile was genuine. She opened the door wider, and I stepped inside. "I can smell the coffee from here," I said, breathing in the rich, caramely aroma. Her house was immaculate. Or, I should probably say, Jack Kimball's house was immaculate, given that I knew he was the one who owned it. I pushed the thought away. This was not the time to reveal I had stumbled upon the identity of Happy Accident Enterprises. I was here as a friend, not a nosy Nancy. I sliced the pears as she poured me a cup of Pete's best dark roast, and we settled into her sunny breakfast nook. I had intended to keep the conversation light, with talk of my second grader declaring she had a boyfriend, and my befuddlement that the gardenias I planted last spring were all dying. But she wanted to tackle the elephant in the room, so I followed her lead. "Evan told me you helped him, she began, then looked down at her fingernails. I noticed she had let her manicure go. They were chipped and uneven just like mine. "Right place, right time," I said, trying to diffuse the gravity of what had happened. He would have been just fine without me. I was all too happy to let him be the hero. Truth is, besides steering her waterlogged legs onto his back seat, I didn't really do a thing. "It's kind of a miracle that he found me," she said, then went on to explain. "I guess he got some sort of flood alert. He thought he was just coming over to reset the alarm." It was clear she still wanted me to think they weren't together. If her suicide attempt was spurred by guilty feelings about the relationship, I didn't want to push, so I let it ride. "Well, thank goodness for that alarm," I said, then couldn't help myself from adding, "But honestly, I think people have a sixth sense about their loved ones." I told her about an incident Margot once had in a community pool. A girl who couldn't swim had followed her into the deep end, then started to panic when she realized she was in over her head. My nose was in a book. Margot was a good swimmer, and there was a lifeguard on duty. But the moment the panicked girl grabbed onto my daughter, I felt an urgent impulse to look up. I was in that water in 3 seconds flat. "I think we can sense when the people we care about are in trouble," I opined. "Oh, Evan doesn't care about me," Holly replied. "I know what it probably looks like, but it's not that," she said. "We barely know each other." I didn't want to contradict her, but I saw the look in Evan's eyes when he was carrying her out of the house. It was not the look of a man who didn't care. I wondered if her dead husband had seen that look too, and if it had something to do with his untimely death. I still didn't have any idea how her husband had died. What if he'd found out about his wife's admirer and driven off a cliff? I knew it was dangerous to ask, but my curiosity got the best of me. "So, how do you know Evan?" Her answer was as surprising as if her head turned into a bird and flew out the window. "He works for the man who owns this house," she said. And of course I knew who that was, because my husband worked for him too. "Oh, so you're renting," I said, seizing on the opportunity to change the subject to something less emotionally charged. The fact that Jack Kimball owned her house and employed my husband was a crazy coincidence, but hardly scandalous. Jack Kimball probably owned many houses. He was a mogul, and moguls own properties. That's why they're moguls. "Do you know who owns your house?" I asked, eager to share the coincidence. If she didn't already know, surely she'd get a kick out of learning the Jack Kimball was her landlord, and that my husband also had a connection to him. "No," she said. "Evan found it. We only deal with him." I thought about the house being owned by an LLC, and how it was entirely possible she didn't know who owned it, just as I hadn't until a few days ago, and probably never would have if it weren't for Andy's contract. "And you never asked him?" I said, setting up my big reveal. I couldn't wait to tell her she had a celebrity landlord. If I sensed she was uncomfortable that I was snooping around, I would just explain that I looked up the public record to see how much it sold for, to know what my house was worth. People do that all the time. "I'm not allowed to know," she said, and my excitement mounted. It made perfect sense that Jack Kimball would want to preserve his privacy, but I figured we could keep it our little secret. "Because the man who owns this house," she began, then looked down into her cup. "What about the man who owns this house?" I asked, thinking maybe she did know after all and was just baiting me. She put down her coffee and looked me square in the eye. "The man who owns this house killed my husband." I nearly fell out of my chair. I must have looked incredulous because she explained, "He lets us live here for free, so we don't try to find out who he is and press charges." I was too flabbergasted to speak. If what she was saying was true, Jack Kimball, the man who single-handedly was about to pull us out of poverty, was a killer. And nobody knew it but me.
Jack. 3 months ago. I wish I had been the one behind the wheel. I would have turned myself in right then and there. I would have faced the consequences, apologized, endured my punishment. Yes, it would have been the end of my career, but I've had a good run. I've had success beyond my wildest dreams, provided well for my family, and lived my 50 years on Earth to the fullest. I thought about saying that I did it, but it was too risky. Not because I feared going to jail. I wasn't worried about that. Not really. I was worried they'd figure out it wasn't really me. I was at work that day. My employees all saw me. Even if I could get them to lie for me, which I couldn't and wouldn't, I worked on a studio lot. There are cameras everywhere, clocking who comes in, who goes out. There was no way to say I wasn't at work when it happened. I'd been there all morning. And then there were the phone records, that devastating incoming call that made my breakfast rise up in my throat. I didn't know what I was hearing at first. "Slow down, I can't understand you," I told him, until I realized something horrific had happened. Then, in a stern voice, I said, "Hang up the phone and meet me at the house." The entire ride home, I prayed that I had misunderstood. The words were garbled, mangled by emotion. Maybe I didn't really hear, "I think I killed him." But then why was he sobbing like that? The 20-minute ride to the house was a blur. I was not in my body. My car drove on autopilot, stopping at red, cruising through green. This isn't real. Things like this don't happen to people like me. Tragedies befall damaged people. I am healthy, hardworking, good. This can't be happening. Not to me. A man will go to extreme lengths to protect himself from pain. He will lie, cheat, steal, or even resort to violence in order to save himself. It's how, as human beings, we are wired. It's in our DNA. Until we have children. Then our focus shifts from protecting ourselves to protecting them. It makes perfect sense. We are today, but they are tomorrow. Our kids are our future, our legacy, a chronological extension of ourselves. I pulled into the driveway and opened the garage. He was already there, sitting inside the SUV. I could see the outline of his shoulders hunched over the wheel. I parked and got out of my Porsche, then walked into the garage and hugged my son. Chapter 30. "We need to talk," Evan announced when I answered the phone. It was late, after 10 o'clock, but he said it couldn't wait until morning. "I'm coming over." He sounded upset. It wasn't like him to show his emotions, at least not to me. I knew him to be professional, disciplined, reserved. I tried not to panic, but the possibilities scared the shit out of me. Had someone found a piece of evidence linking us to the scene? Did Holly break? Or maybe it was Savannah. Was she having buyer's remorse? I kissed my wife, muttered something about having to catch up on some work, and headed to my study to wait. We never talked about the incident over the phone, only in person. It was our hard and fast rule, but I tried to reassure myself. Just because he wouldn't tell me over the phone didn't mean it was catastrophic. I thought about how the accident had changed my life. My son was supposed to be a freshman in college, but I wouldn't let him go, not until I knew we were in the clear. I told him he needed to stay close to home, get a job, let things settle. He wasn't happy about it, but he obeyed. It was not a big deal to defer his admittance. I made the call to the dean of admission myself. We had a family situation, I'd explained, and it was done. Kate was surprised when our son told her he wanted to defer starting college, but not disappointed. She loved having him at home. He sometimes even joined us for dinner. She cooked all his favorite meals, shrimp scampi, spaghetti carbonara, jambalaya, even though it was murdering my waistline. My phone chirped with Evan's text announcing his arrival, and I went to the front door to let him in. Kate was in the kitchen making her nightly cup of tea. I didn't think she could hear us over the sound of the kettle humming, but I played it safe. "Thanks for coming," I said, shaking his hand. "Shall we go to my study?" He knew this formality was just for show, and he played along. "Lead the way." We walked to my office in silence. This is what a man having an affair must feel like, I thought, sneaking around at night in the dark. I had made the decision to hide this from Kate the day it happened, and it was too late to go back now. She had no idea I had reassigned our son's trust fund. It was Evan's idea, a way to hide the payout from both the IRS and my wife. And while losing this money surely hurt him, it was far less painful than what would have happened to him if he had turned himself in. I opened the study door for Evan and indicated for him to sit, but he declined, so we both just stood there. He had called this meeting, so I waited for him to speak. When he finally did, his voice was raw, stripped down to pure emotion. "I have some difficult news," he began. He looked exhausted. Whatever he was about to tell me had really rattled him. I braced myself for the worst. He looked up at me with hollow eyes. "What is it?" I asked. "Holly tried to kill herself today." Shame bubbled up from the pit of my stomach. I grabbed the desk as my legs went numb. We had talked about her breaking, but never in a million years thought we would push her to this. "Jesus Christ," I muttered. I thought about Savannah, how happy we'd been that we'd gotten to her first. We never thought about what it might do to her mother. "Is she going to be all right?" He nodded and said, "Yes, thank God," then sank down onto the couch. I got her to the hospital in time to pump her stomach. I let the image wash over me. I deserved to feel the grotesque shock of it. Neither of us spoke for a long, solemn minute. "Maybe I should talk to her," I finally suggested. I hated hiding in the shadows like this. Perhaps the best thing to do at this point was to tell her the truth. But Evan wouldn't have it. "Absolutely not," he said firmly. He was right, of course. My fame and popularity had smoothed many a ruffled feather in the past, but this was bigger than even me. "There's something else," Evan said, and now I sat down too, hoping he had led with the worst of it. "Your son came to her hospital room." And that confused me. "He did what?" I asked dumbly, unable to make sense of it. Why would he do that? How did he even know? And Evan's reply was so absurd I almost laughed. "He's dating Holly's daughter." I repeated his words in my head to make sure I'd heard him right, then shook my head. "Logan knows better than to go anywhere near either of them," I insisted. "He's smarter than that." But Evan was insistent. "They're dating. He introduced himself as her boyfriend. They were holding hands." I felt anger rise up the back of my neck. I wasn't sure if it was meant for Evan for saying something so implausible, or for my son because I thought there was a chance it could be true. "Maybe it's a coincidence," I suggested, and Evan laughed out loud. "No way." My anger turned to panic, because Logan was smart, deviously smart, which meant he knew exactly what he was doing, even though I didn't have a clue. "There could be a perfectly reasonable explanation," I offered, even though I couldn't think of one. "Logan was a good kid, a varsity athlete and straight-A student. I knew it was hard for him sometimes, being the son of a celebrity, never knowing who your friends are and having to share your dad with the world, but he handled the pressure of being under the public eye well. Or at least he seemed to. Maybe I had missed more than I knew during all those months away shooting movies. Had I overlooked something? Was there a side of him I'd never seen? "Where is he now?" Evan asked, and I shook my head. "I don't know. He's an adult." I started by way of excuse, but he cut me off. "You need to find him," my lawyer said. "We need to talk to him about what the hell he thinks he's doing." Evan had never raised his voice to me before, but I let it go because in this fraught moment, I knew I was going to need him now more than ever.
Savannah, 3 months ago. There was a knock on our door at 8 a.m. We knew the police were going to want to talk to us. We just thought they would come at a decent hour. I showed Officer Kellogg and his plainclothes sidekick into our living room, then went to the bedroom to wake up Mom. "Mom," I said as I touched her arm. "They're here." She blinked herself awake. She looked disoriented, but that was not uncommon these days. "I'll make you some coffee," I told her, as I handed her a bra and a pair of sweats that would fit over her brace. There was no point in asking them to come back later. The sooner we got this over with, the better. "You can sit down if you want," I told the policeman as I returned to the living room after putting the coffee on. Kellogg looked a little winded from those 3 flights of stairs, but plainclothes dismissed my offer with a stoic smile, so they both just remained standing. It took a couple of minutes and the aroma of fresh brew to get my mom out of bed. She was bleary-eyed but not ungracious to our unexpected company as she joined us in the living room. "Good morning, officers," she said. "I hope you don't mind if I sit?" "Of course," they both said in unison. In the kitchen, the coffee pot sputtered, and I used it as an excuse to slink out of the room. I had to get out of there. I felt like I was suffocating. Mom was about to put the final nail in our Pandora's box of secrets. After she lied to the police about what we did, there would be no going back. I reminded myself that our hand had been forced, and that I didn't want her to tell. Nothing good would come of it. "Any details you can remember," I heard one of them say, as I opened the cupboard to forage for cups. I suddenly realized I had no idea what she would say. We hadn't talked about how to handle questions from the police, or any of it really. How else we could have survived without Dad. What we would do if we got caught. I never asked her if she wanted to go through with it, because what if she didn't? Would I try to change her mind? I didn't want to be broke. I didn't want to be pitied. And more than anything, I didn't want to go back to my old school. The thought of facing all those tears and hugs and, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry's," was enough to make me want to hurl. My teachers had already told me I could take my 10th grade finals at home and excused me from all remaining assignments. So once my mom moved back home, I cleaned out my locker and said goodbye to my friends. I didn't know I'd never see them again, but even if I had, I wouldn't have cared. I hated that place. I wanted to be at a school where you didn't have to keep your head down when you walked through the halls. I wanted to go somewhere with a real track and field program, one that had locker rooms with working showers. I wanted to be with people who wanted something more out of school than to just get through. I wanted friends who didn't have to work every weekend and could hang out. And I wanted a boyfriend, a guy from a good family who could afford to take me out and had a car to drive me home. But more than all those things I wanted, there was one thing I didn't want: to be the girl whose dad died. I didn't want people to look at me with that "poor you" half smile. I didn't want to spend the next 2 years ducking Principal Price, who I'd cried all over and would never be able to look in the face again. I didn't want anyone to start a GoFundMe page or bring us hand-me-downs or a lasagna. I didn't want to be talked about, pitied, stared at, coddled, or avoided. I didn't want to have to assure people I was going to be okay, because some days I might not be. I didn't want to have to start every conversation with someone saying, "Sorry about your dad," or hate them for not saying it. People would say they didn't bring it up because they didn't want to remind me, as if I wasn't going to be thinking about him every damn minute of every damn day for the rest of my life. I wanted to move forward, but more than that, I didn't want to go back. I fished the milk out of the fridge, then smelled it to make sure it hadn't turned. With just 2 of us in the apartment, perishables sat a lot longer now. I had already thrown out a pound of deli meat, a half-dozen tomatoes, 2 avocados, and a hunk of moldy cheese. "I'm sorry, but It's all just a blink, I heard Mom say as I opened the cutlery drawer. I was just about to fish for a spoon when the detective asked a question that stopped me cold. Do you know what this cord was for? Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a plainclothes pinching a power cord between his finger and thumb, the one for the dash cam. My hand hovered above the teaspoons as I waited for Mom to answer. Is it for a cell phone? Mom asked. No, not for a cell phone, Kellogg said. It's a barrel connector. Phones use USB. Plainclothes stepped forward to show it to her. She looked at it and shrugged. I'm not much of a tech person, Mom said, and that was true. When Dad showed her the dash cam, she had just rolled her eyes and called it a ridiculous waste of money. And at the time, I had agreed. Did you have a nav? Kellogg asked. Mom shook her head no. I always just used my phone. And that was also true. What about a dash cam? The detective asked. The coffee maker gurgled as the last drops of French roast dribbled into the pot. This was her chance to tell all, get justice for Dad. I squeezed my eyes shut as I waited to hear if she was going to take it. It was an old car, Mom said. We never bought any fancy equipment for it. I opened my eyes to see my hand was shaking. I balled it into a fist to match the growing knot in my stomach. The dash cam was in my room, a mere 10 feet from where the cops were standing, and the video was on the phone in my back pocket. It had automatically synced when the camera was in range, no password needed. That's too bad, Kellogg said. A dash cam would have made our jobs very easy. But we have other avenues, don't you fret. I suddenly realized I'd been holding my breath. I picked up the pot, then exhaled behind the swoosh of pouring coffee. A skilled detective might have sensed Mom was hiding something, but we were poor white trash. We didn't get LAPD's A-team. I didn't know whether to be relieved or pissed. I vaguely heard Kellogg ask if we wanted to file a stolen property report for the car, and then apologized that that cord, whatever it was for, was the only thing they had extracted before the car disappeared. I tried not to think about what kind of people could disappear a car, right under the cops' noses. But as I was about to find out, they were capable of much worse than that. Chapter 31. I spent the night in my mom's hospital room. Just like old times, I thought, as I contorted my body to fit on the narrow fold-out cot. They discharged her first thing in the morning. I didn't want people to wonder where I was. Calabasas High kids didn't ditch. So I went straight to school, wearing yesterday's clothes, and propped up by a triple espresso. If any of my friends knew my mom had OD'd, they didn't let on. Trisha from pre-calc hit me up for help with her test correction like always. Nicole asked to borrow my phone at lunch again because she was grounded and had hers taken away. And my English teacher still called on me to explain how Cordelia propels the plot in King Lear, and still tisk-tisked me when I didn't know. I was having the high school experience I'd always dreamed about. I loved my shiny new locker, our fancy auditorium with recessed lights and padded seats, the chem lab with enough Bunsen burners so everyone got a turn. I tried not to think about how I got here, because those kinds of thoughts would have ruined the whole thing. The bell finally rang. Butterflies twirled in my stomach as I scooped up my books and headed for the meeting place. I was relieved to see my mom was already there. She smiled at me when I got in the car, then asked about my day like everything was perfectly normal. I had told her that we didn't have track practice that day, which was a lie. I didn't want her to know I was afraid to leave her alone all day, because that would have made her feel guilty and sad, and we'd had enough of that. When we got home, she said she needed to lie down and went up to her room. A few minutes later, she called to me, so I went up and stood at her bedside. "Sit," she said softly, and I sat down on the bed. She grabbed my wrist and she held it tight, like you would a child's. "What I did yesterday," she said, "was incredibly selfish." My throat got tight. I willed myself not to cry. I didn't want to make her feel bad, Her feeling bad is how we got here in the first place. I want you to have a big, full life. Have everything I never had. I guess I just didn't want to get in the way of that, you know? I nodded, but I wasn't sure what she meant. She was my mom, and the reason I even existed. How could she be in my way? Anyway, it was stupid, and I'm not going to do it again. I don't want you to worry. She looked really tired. Her under eyes were puffy and dark, so I nodded like I agreed, even though I was worried as shit. Libby came over this morning, she said. I was afraid to try to be friends with her. Afraid to try to be friends with anybody. I don't know. Maybe I thought I didn't deserve to have friends. Her voice went up like a question, so I nodded to let her know I understood. Did you tell her? I asked, unsure what I wanted her answer to be. It was risky, letting even a trusted friend in on our secret. But keeping everything all bottled up had proven dangerous too. Not everything, Mom replied. But enough to feel like I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not anymore. And you know what? It felt good. She smiled, but I still felt uneasy. Is she telling me I should tell someone too? And how much could I say if I did? She squeezed my hand, then closed her eyes. I knew she wanted to sleep, so I swallowed my questions and went downstairs to start my homework. Shakespeare was hard enough when you could concentrate, so I didn't make much headway. As I sat there reading the same 3 verses over and over, I thought about what she said about not deserving friends. And I realized I felt the same way every damn day. I just handled it by shopping and pretending. It was getting dark out. I was just about to rummage in the fridge for something to eat when the doorbell rang. I should have known Logan would stop by. He had been texting me throughout the day. Funny little memes like a cat clinging to a branch, hang in there, and dancing flowers singing, the sun will come out tomorrow. I was such a wreck at the hospital that I'd sent him away. He didn't need to see me all puffy-faced and crying. I wanted him to like me, not feel sorry for me, although it was probably too late now. Hi, I said, when I answered the door. I tried to sound normal, like everything was fine now. Missed you at practice, he said, pulling a bouquet of yellow roses from behind his back. They were the color of sunshine and cut through the darkness like a ray of light. Why are you so nice to me? I asked. I didn't deserve flowers after what I had done to my mom. In fact, they were just making me feel worse. Because you're my girlfriend, he said simply. I had never been anyone's girlfriend or gotten flowers, except for my parents at my 8th grade graduation. But they weren't the fancy kind like these were, with little vials of water on each stem to keep them fresh. Are you going to invite me in? He asked. I looked and felt like shit, but those flowers looked expensive. I closed the door behind him as he stepped into the entryway. How's your mom? He asked, and I clenched my teeth to keep from crying. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just shrugged. The crinkly plastic sheath around the flowers crunched against my chest as he pulled me into a hug. It's going to be okay, he said into my hair. He let me go, then looked down at the flowers. Let's go put those in some water. I found a vase and we set the flowers on the kitchen table. I need to go check on her, I told Logan. She's upstairs resting. I hated him seeing me like this. I thought he would take the hint and leave, but instead he asked, Want me to come with you? I didn't, but I nodded anyway. He slipped off his shoes and held my hand up the stairs. I indicated that he should wait in my room while I peeked in on her, then padded down the hall toward her open door. I took a few steps into the room, but stopped short of her bedside. Mom was lying on her back, hands by her sides, eyes softly closed. I could see her chest gently expanding and contracting. She was sleeping. I don't know what I was so worried about. She didn't have any more pills left. I'd made sure of that. and the other ways to do it seemed too complicated and messy, but I was still uneasy. "How's she doing?" Logan asked when I returned to my room. He was sitting on my bed, trying to solve my Rubik's Cube. I didn't want to talk about Mom, so I changed the subject. "There's a trick to that," I said, indicating the cube, and he laughed. "Yeah, you have to be smart," he said playfully. The sound of his laugh made me feel tingly all over, and I felt myself relax a little. "There is a sequence of moves, you just have to memorize it." I sat down beside him, and he offered me the cube. Our fingers touched as I took it from his outstretched hand. He lifted my chin. His eyes were the color of water, clear and blue and deep. "I don't want you to feel like you're alone through all of this," he said. "I'm here. Lean on me." His gaze was like a drug. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I thought about what Mom had said, about how it made her feel better to talk to someone. I decided to test the waters. "There's a lot you don't know," I started, then squeezed my eyes shut. I knew I shouldn't say any more, but holding all these secrets by myself was exhausting, and I needed to be strong for Mom now more than ever. "So, tell me," he coaxed. And I imagined how good it would feel to have it all off my chest, to tell someone, just like Mom had. "The accident that killed my dad," I began. I would just tell him the basics, not the whole thing. Just that we were being taken care of, that we didn't see any point of anyone going to jail. "What about it?" he asked. A piece of hair fell in front of my face, and he tucked it behind my ear. "It was an accident, right?" He leaned on the word accident, like he wanted to make sure, but I shook my head. "It was a hit and run," I announced. This was the first time that I had said the words out loud, and they scared me, because it was a crime. My dad had been murdered, and I had played a part in covering it up. "And they never found the guy who did it?" Logan guessed, and I shook my head. "No, but—" I started, then shut my mouth. I knew I should stop there. It wouldn't be fair to bring Logan in on this. If I told him what I knew, he'd be an accessory, just like me. "You've been through so much," Logan soothed. "Don't carry this by yourself." His hand was on my thigh. It was heavy and strong. I wanted those hands to lift the horrible weight of all the guilt I was holding and carry it away. Mom said she just told Libby a little, not everything, just enough to not feel alone. Maybe I could do the same. "I have a video," I announced, "from the accident. There was a dash cam in my parents' car." He suddenly retracted his hand. My leg felt cool with the sweat from his palm. "You have a video, and you didn't turn it in?" His blue eyes turned to fire. I suddenly realized I'd made a huge mistake. I shouldn't have told him that part. Now he knew I was a criminal. In a few short moves, he'd crack me like that Rubik's Cube, figure out my whole life was a lie. "It might not show anything," I backtracked. "I never even watched it." I could see his mind spinning. I could tell he was distressed. What kind of a person withholds evidence from the police? I had to find a way to bring him back to my side. It was possible the video was just a blur, that this was all a big nothing. "I was afraid," I started. My voice was shaking, but I didn't care. "Afraid to see, you know." His expression was blank. I was losing him. When he finally spoke, his words surprised me. "You need to delete it." I had thought about that. How I couldn't get in trouble for suppressing evidence if I didn't have any. But that video was the only leverage I had. What if whoever Evan worked for decided he didn't want to pay anymore? We would lose everything. We had already lost so much. We may not have handled this perfectly, but we didn't deserve to be tossed out on the street. I can't, I said. It's complicated, I added, even though I knew it would only swell his curiosity. He thought for a beat, then made a suggestion that made my blood run cold. Then let's watch it, he said. I looked into those eyes that made me feel safe and loved, that had seen me naked and never once looked away. You mean, right now? He nodded. Yes. Let's watch it together. Then you don't have to be afraid. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the app with shaking hands. I had no idea what was on that video. But with Logan by my side, I decided to find out. I clicked on the footage and pressed play.
Libby. 3 months ago. Pick 3 things, Andy said as he snuggled with the girls in Tatum's bed. A bunny, Tatum shouted. A broomstick, Margot offered. 1 more, Andy said. He was playing the story game, where the girls pick 3 random objects and he weaves them into a fairy tale, sometimes an absurd one, depending on what they picked. A fire truck, Tatum said, and I knew this was going to be a fun one. You can come in if you want, my husband said to me as he caught me watching from the doorway. Well, I do love the story game, I said, then joined them on the bed. It had been a long time since Andy had done story time with the girls. He was so busy writing these days. But he must have sensed they needed it. And maybe he needed it too. Mommy needs to pick something, Tatum demanded. But we already have 3, Margot said. She was always a stickler for rules, just like her mom. We can do 4 tonight, Andy offered, looking at me. I thought for a second. A banana, I finally said, and Tatum giggled. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful princess, Andy began. Princess Elizabeth, he said, then smiled at me. Elizabeth was my given name, of course, but nobody had ever called me that, not even the minister at my baptism. Andy launched into the story about the benevolent Princess Elizabeth who oh so desperately wanted a banana, and I was surprised at how eager I was to find out if she would get one. My husband was a master storyteller. If creativity were a currency, we'd be rich. If only it were that simple. Both my sisters married well. Cricket was the oldest. She married Gary, who worked on Wall Street and made a fortune reselling mortgages. They lived in a penthouse in Lower Manhattan and had a beachfront home on Martha's Vineyard. Gabrielle, who we called Gator, was the youngest. Her husband, Richie, did credit card payment processing for huge retail and restaurant chains. They lived in Greenwich and had a boat. My mother had no shame about encouraging her daughters to marry for lifestyle. It's not that she didn't believe in love, she told us. It's just foolish to fall in love with a man who can't take care of you. Because, as she put it, if you don't love your lifestyle, inevitably you will fall out of love with your man. She told us this because she genuinely believed it. And based on the choices they had made, it appeared my sisters believed it too. But I was the middle child, so I had to do things my way. I had a romantic vision of finding a man with potential and shepherding him toward greatness. I wanted a man who wasn't fully cooked, so that when he bloomed into a magnificent soufflé, I could take credit for helping him rise. I confess my ego was wrapped up in this fantasy. But I also wasn't attracted to the kind of man whose idea of creating was using money to make more money. I needed someone with more interesting abilities than that. My mother warned me that marrying Andy might not turn out like I had hoped. It's not that she didn't like him. She just wasn't a fan of unnecessary risks. She reminded me there were plenty of established men to love, and even schemed to introduce me to some. But in the end, I followed my ego and my heart. Mine was the only wedding of the 3 where my mom cried. and I was the only granddaughter who got a diamond, and we all knew it wasn't because I was Grandma's favorite. So now, as predicted, we were dangling out on a ledge. But my husband was smart, and my kids didn't need concert tickets or a trip to Disneyland to be entertained. Suddenly, the princess spied something strange and magical, Andy said. It was big and red and had 3 times as many wheels as any chariot she had ever seen. A fire truck, Tatum bellowed, and we all laughed. That's right, a fire truck, Andy confirmed. As the girls hung on his every word, something stirred deep in my belly. It had been a long time, but I recognized it as desire. And I knew, even though times were tough, I had made the right choice. Chapter 32. I had to find out how he died. Holly said that he'd been killed, and that it was her landlord who did it. I decided not to tell her who her landlord was, at least not yet. The idea that Jack Kimball was a murderer seemed positively insane. And if it was true, did I even want to know? My husband had just signed a life-changing contract with him. If I was smart, I would just keep my mouth shut and forget all about it. But I couldn't. So how was I going to find out how Holly's husband had died? I didn't even know his name. Solving puzzles was my husband's superpower. But I wasn't sure I wanted to tell him what Holly had just told me, not with $1 million contract on the line. I would have to find out for myself. I recalled the day when Andy found out Holly was a widow. He had started sleuthing, but I had interrupted, and so he stopped. I'm not the jealous type, but Holly was a bombshell, and he likely, rightfully, felt self-conscious taking an interest in her past. I trusted he had abandoned the investigation. Under normal circumstances, any wife would be relieved. But now I wished I'd let him finish the job. I remembered that he'd been on Savannah's Instagram, so that's where I started. Andy had told me Holly's husband died about 3 months ago, so I logged onto his daughter's page and started scrolling backward. After enduring countless mind-numbing selfies, I finally got to her post of May 20th announcing the death of her dad. I scrolled through the flurry of condolence messages. It was a sea of hearts, thinking of you, and hug emojis, sending hugs. I was about to give up when I saw a post from someone called byline_by_Jed. We honor your dad in this week's paper, Jed wrote. Hope I got the deets right. Hang in there. He included a link. My heartbeat quickened as I clicked. And there it was, an obituary for the departed Gabriel Monroe Kendrick in the Valley High Times, Savannah's Van Nuys high school newspaper. There was a picture of the happy family, arms around each other, smiling at the camera. They were dressed up. Maybe some sort of concert? Was Savannah in the chorus? The band? Savannah's hair looked professionally blown out. Holly was in a black wrap dress. The departed husband wore a dress shirt but no tie. I read the article, savoring every word so as not to miss any details. Our cherished classmate, Savannah Kendrick, lost her father in a tragic accident last week. The article was dated May 24th, 4 days after Savannah's post. The timeline made sense, but there was one discrepancy. Jed wrote that it was an accident, but Holly implied something far more nefarious. I continued reading.
This is the end of disc number 5. Please insert disc number 6. This is disc number 6.
Mr. Kendrick was struck and killed by a speeding car outside their home on Calvert Street in Van Nuys. I paused to look up the address. Holly had said they'd lived in Van Nuys. This detail checked out. While by all accounts an accident, the budding reporter wrote, The driver fled the scene, and at this writing is still at large. I pondered the words, fled the scene. If the student reporter got the story right, it was not just an accident. It was a hit and run, which is both an accident and a crime. The wheels in my head started turning. Could Jack Kimball have been the driver? If his identity was unknown to Holly, why had he bought her a house? I couldn't make sense of it. I was going to need some professional help. "Andy!" I called out. He was probably in the garage fixing something. He didn't answer, so I unplugged my laptop and headed that way. If anyone could quash this crazy hypothesis, it would be Andy. He'd figure out what really happened, and then we'd laugh at how my imagination had once again gone completely off the rails. I opened the garage door to see Andy sanding one of Margot's desk drawers. He stopped when he saw me. "She said it was sticky," he began, and I cut him off. "You need to help me with something," I said, flipping the computer screen to face him. At the end of the obituary was a headshot of Gabriel Monroe Kendrick in military blues. Andy looked at it, then up at me. "What is that?" "Holly's husband's obituary," I said. "It says he was killed in a hit and run." I read him the short passage about the driver being at large, then announced, "You're going to think this is crazy, but I think Jack Kimball might have been the driver." To my great surprise, my husband didn't laugh at me. "Because he owns her house?" he asked. I nodded, then dropped the bomb. Holly told me the person who owns her house killed her husband. "When did she tell you that?" he asked. "Just now, when I went to visit her." "That would be a hell of a coincidence," he said. Then he asked, "She really said that?" I nodded. "She said she lives there for free. Compliments of the man who killed her husband." He frowned. "But she doesn't know who it is." I shook my head no. "Evan is some kind of middleman," I said. "What I can't figure out is, why would Jack Kimball anonymously be taking care of them? Could it be for karma's sake? Or is there a more diabolical reason?" "Let me see that," Andy said, reaching for my computer. His eyes scanned the obituary. "Says he died on May 17th, he said, not really to me. His hands started tapping on my keyboard, and then they suddenly stopped. "What?" I asked. I was eager for him to find the hole in my theory that would debunk the whole thing. "You're not going to believe this," he said, looking up at me, "but I saw Jack Kimball on May 17th. He had opened up his calendar of appointments. Sure enough, on that very day, he'd had a meeting with the one and only Jack Kimball. "So he couldn't have done it," I said, feeling a surge of relief. "Because he was meeting with you." It would have put a serious damper on things if my husband's new boss was a killer. I once again felt foolish for even imagining it. "No, he cancelled on me," Andy reminded me, "because something suddenly came up. But he was there on the lot. His office is all glass. I saw him through the window." I was getting confused now. Does that mean it could have been him, or couldn't have been him? My husband was already Googling again. I looked over to see he'd typed Jack and Kimball and family into the search bar. "He's married with one son," Andy said, clicking on a photo of a younger Jack Kimball with his wife and a boy who looked about 10. My hand flew over my mouth as I audibly gasped. "What?" Andy asked. "You recognize them?" "The son," I said. "What's his name?" It was an old photo, but the resemblance was unmistakable. "Logan," my husband said, reading the caption. "Why?" My heart plunged into my stomach, because it all made sense now. "Logan," I stuttered, pointing to his photo. "Logan is Savannah's boyfriend's name." Andy's brow contracted. I could see the wheels turning in his head. "This photo is from 8 years ago," he said. which would make him well into his teens by now. I remembered thinking what a good conversationalist he was for such a young man, how polite and composed, like someone who grew up in the limelight would be. He's coaching her track team, I reminded him, on a gap year before starting Harvard. He clicked through more photos and finally found a more recent one. There was no denying it was the same Logan. The coincidences keep piling up, I said nervously, hoping my husband would agree with me. But he didn't. I'm not sure it's a coincidence, he said somberly. You think he's the one? I couldn't finish the sentence. It was just too horrifying to speak out loud. It would certainly explain Jack's behavior that day, Andy said, and his need to make amends. But why is Logan hanging around Savannah then? I asked. You would think if he did something like this, he would stay as far away from her as possible. Unless he wants something from her, he replied. His expression was grim as he added, but I can't imagine what that could be. We could be completely wrong about all of this, I said. I mean, we can't just go accusing anyone. If he's stalking Savannah and we knew, but didn't warn her mom, how would you feel? I thought about Holly, how she'd taken all those pills, how vulnerable she was. And I knew I had to tell her.
Jack. 3 months ago. I only looked down for a second, Logan said. 1 second! He came out of nowhere. I didn't doubt my son was telling the truth. He was a good boy. He didn't drink or smoke, certainly not during the day, and would never drive under the influence. He knew there was always another way to get home. He had his own Uber account, and worst-case scenario, he could call me or his mom. We would always come get him, no questions asked. It wasn't my fault, he insisted. And maybe it wasn't. Maybe the pedestrians he mowed down in broad daylight did come out of nowhere. It was possible. Something similar happened to me when I was a teenager. I was riding my bike down a hill, and someone in a parked car opened his driver's side door right in front of me. My front tire slammed into the inside of the car door, and my bike crumpled into itself. Whose fault was it? Technically, I slammed into the car, but the driver opened the door without even looking. There was no way I could have avoided hitting it. But I was on a speeding bike, and nobody died. So whose fault was it in Logan's case? Just because the guy he hit was dead didn't mean my son was at fault. In all likelihood, they were both culpable, the dead man and my son. But only one of them lived to talk about it. Traffic was bad, so I cut down the side street, Logan explained. I looked down at the phone to see where to turn, 1 or 2 seconds, max. When I looked up, a guy was opening the door for some lady. I tried to swerve out of the way, but there was a moving truck blocking the middle lane. There was nowhere to go. His whole body was shaking. I knew he wanted me to tell him everything was going to be okay, but I couldn't. It was too late for that. I blew the door clean off, he said, eyes wide with fear. I know I should have stopped, but I just... His voice crumbled into sobs. I spun his shoulders toward me and held him tight. You panicked, I said. He was frantic, so I tried to reassure him. That's natural. Anybody would. Of course he should have stopped. Fleeing the scene was the worst thing he could have done, but now was not the time for should-haves. Don't tell Mom, he begged. Please. This was, of course, an absurd request. I would tell his mother, and we would both go with him to the police station so he could turn himself in, just as soon as he calmed down. It was an accident, I said, trying to reassure him. We'll stand by you when you go to explain, but he cut me off. Dad, a man died. We can't go to the police. His eyes were wild with desperation. The thought of not telling the police was crazy talk, and the longer we waited, the worse things would get. Logan, don't be stupid, I said in my stern parental voice. We have to come clean here. No one saw me, he insisted. The street was empty, and even if they did, there's no plates on this car yet. There's no way to ID it. It was true. The SUV was almost brand new. The plates hadn't arrived yet. It would be difficult to positively ID the vehicle, but just because he might get away with it didn't mean we should try. I shook my head, tried to show resolve. Logan, we can't. They'll kick me out of Harvard, he pleaded. Even if it was an accident, it's still manslaughter. That's a crime. You know I'm not a criminal. I looked at my son. At 17, he was still just a boy, with barely a hint of facial hair and skin as fresh as snow. No, he wasn't a criminal, but hit and run was a crime, and the more time that passed, the more likely he would be charged with it. But before I could explain this, he hit me with another argument. You have your career to think about, he warned. The press will have a field day with this. Of course, I had thought of that, and he was right. Something like this would hurt me personally and professionally. It would ruin my life, my wife's life, and my son's entire future. He had the most to lose here. The fallout would be excruciating for him, but we couldn't just pretend it hadn't happened. Could we? I sent Evan to the scene, I said, not sure where I was going with this. I have no idea what he's going to find there. I stopped short of promising anything. Could I really ask Evan to try to bury this? It will follow us forever, Logan warned. You'll be that movie star whose son killed a man. And then he said something that rocked me to my core. It will kill Mom. She'd literally die. I thought about Kate, how much she loved her son, what it would do to her to have him crucified by the press, kicked out of Harvard, reduced to a celebrity cautionary tale. Logan was right. If she found out, she'd be crushed. I dialed Evan's number. He picked up on the first ring. Almost there, boss, he said into the phone. And I said something I immediately knew would come back to haunt me. I need you to fix this, I told him. There was a long beat of silence, and I knew I was asking too much. I half hoped he would say he couldn't or wouldn't. I was about to rescind the command, but he spoke first. I'll do my best, he said. And I knew that if there was a way out of this, he would find it. And I didn't know if I should be terrified or relieved. Chapter 33. I had a busy day of meetings, but that's not why I was avoiding Evan's calls. He was waiting for me in my driveway when I got home. Jesus, Evan, I said, you can't just hang around my house. Did you talk to him? Evan asked. I shook my head. Not yet. You need to tell me what he knows about the deal we made with Holly, Evan said a little too loud. Kate was inside, and I didn't want her to hear him talking to me like that and become alarmed. I told him everything, I said, trying not to sound defensive, then completely blowing it by adding, he's my son. Before today, I had never once worried about what my lawyer thought of me. It's not that I didn't care, I just trusted him to remain objective and do his job. But something had changed. He was no longer cool-headed and detached. Holly Kendrick's loss had become personal for him. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. I had to tell him, I insisted. I didn't want him asking about his trust fund in front of his mother. Of all the things I had to be ashamed of, hiding this debacle from Kate was the most pathetic of them all. We were supposed to be a team, our thoughts and values in lockstep. I had betrayed her, and that was by far the most sickening thread in this whole web of lies. So he knows about the video, Evan said, and I nodded. I had considered not telling Logan, but in the end I had thought it was important that he knew Holly and Savannah had leverage over us, which meant his money was gone forever. I told him we got the camera, but the girl likely had a copy of the video, I said, recalling the day I had sat him down and outlined my plan to keep Holly and Savannah happy and comfortable with their beautiful new house and bottomless black card. That's probably what he's after then, Evan asserted. He got close to her so he could find out if she has it and what she plans to do with it. I didn't like the implication that my son was some sort of devious opportunist. Maybe he genuinely liked the girl. How would he even get it from her? I asked, hoping to challenge Evan's theory. If he was going to accuse my son of plotting something, he'd better have thought this through. But he just shrugged. He's your son, you tell me. His voice was flat, and I couldn't tell if he was angry with me for getting us into this mess, or if I was hearing him through the filter of my guilty conscience. I'll talk to him, I said, hoping to end this conversation. We had been standing in my driveway for several minutes. Kate would be wondering why we didn't come in. He stalked and seduced this girl, even though you explicitly told him to stay away, Evan said. We need to know what he's up to right now. Fine. I took out my phone and dialed my son's number. It went straight to voicemail. His phone is off, I announced. I'll try again later. But my lawyer did not let me off so easily. What if he's there? Evan asked, and it took me a second to process what he meant. What, you mean at her house? He raised an eyebrow. I got a prickly feeling on my arms and neck. I didn't think my son would do anything to inflame the situation, but I knew my lawyer wouldn't relent until we had tracked him down and made sure. Fine, let's go, I said. I had no idea what my son was up to or what he was capable of. I tried to ignore the growing feeling of dread in my stomach as I got in Evan's car to go find out.
Savannah, 3 months ago. They told me not to go, that the accident had left my dad unrecognizable. But I wanted to say goodbye, and they were transferring his body tomorrow, so today was my last chance. Mom already told me we weren't going to have a funeral. She didn't want to cry in front of a bunch of people she barely knew. Marines might come. I guess they have a habit of showing up when one of their own dies, and Mom didn't want to endure their hardened faces and somber salutes. The funeral home would pick up the body. He would be cremated, and that would be that. The funeral director said the cremation process would take a week. You would think setting a body on fire would be quick and easy, but apparently people's bones take a long time to burn. Mom had to sign a form saying we understood that even though they sweep the oven between cremations, they don't always get everything. So there may be little bits of other people mixed in with my dad. I wasn't sure I wanted bits of someone's favorite aunt coming home with us, but they said it couldn't be helped. I hoped the person they burned after my dad came from a nice family. So if some of my dad's ashes wound up with them, at least he wouldn't be surrounded by assholes. After Mom signed the forms, they gave us a catalog and asked us to pick an urn. Even the plain ceramic ones were ridiculously expensive for what they were. $400 for a vase with a lid? I could buy a perfectly good canning jar at the dollar store that would work just as well, but that's not how they do it, Mom said, so I just let her pick. Some of the urns came with twin mini-urns, but they didn't put ashes in those because souls split in 2 different containers can't find their way back to God, the funeral guy told us. That didn't make much sense to me after what they said about bits of bodies being left behind, but I didn't want to make a big deal about it, so I didn't say anything. Mom said she didn't want to see Dad's body without him in it. so I had to go to the morgue myself. I called the hospital, and a nice lady with a fancy job title arranged for an orderly in pale green scrubs to meet me at the hospital and escort me to where my dad was chilling. We met in the lobby of the emergency ward, then walked in silence to an elevator you needed a special key to operate. As my escort inserted the key into the slot, I noticed there was only one button on the panel. It didn't have an arrow, but I assumed it was down. I watched enough bad TV to know the morgue is always in the basement. The elevator was wide and lined with metal panels textured in a crisscross pattern that reminded me of monster truck tires. The orderly hesitated before depressing the button. "You sure about this, kid?" I wasn't, but I nodded. I had no reason to be afraid. It was just my dad. And it's not like he could yell at me for what I'd done. He was dead. For once, I would get to do all the talking. The elevator stuttered as it started moving, and I gripped my toes in my shoes to keep from lurching forward. The doors opened to a wide, brightly lit hallway, and I followed Mr. Scrubs around a corner, past a whiteboard with names neatly printed in a grid. A dry erase marker hung from a string, and I almost laughed at the obvious metaphor of how easily a life could be erased. My escort stopped in front of a door with a little window in it, then turned to look at me. "Take as much time as you need," he said simply, then opened the door. The room was narrow, with sterile white walls and a hard tiled door. There were 2 chairs along one wall, facing the gurney where my dad was resting. He was covered with a thick white sheet, and I remember thinking my big, strong, invincible dad suddenly looked really small. The orderly went in first, and I followed him in. I noticed he was wearing thin yellow gloves, and I wondered if he'd had them on the whole time and I just didn't notice. Or perhaps they were in his pocket, and he slipped them on when he was walking. "I'm going to pull the sheet back a little," he said, his voice rising like a question, so I nodded to let him know it was okay. I felt heat rush up my spine as he pinched the sheet between his gloved fingers. It was thick, more like a tablecloth than a sheet, and I wondered if they used special linens for viewing, or if all morgue sheets were this nice. As he peeled the sheet back with silent fingers, it folded in on itself, like a gentle wave lapping the shore. I braced myself to see my dad's face, but it was covered by what looked like a dinner napkin. I noticed the napkin sat almost flat, instead of rising where his nose should be, and I tried not to think about where the strong, straight feature I'd inherited might have gone. The orderly flipped up the bottom corner of the napkin, revealing a sliver of Dad's chin, then retracted his hands and took a step back. He didn't say anything, but I understood he would stop me if I tried to move that napkin, and to my surprise, I felt a flood of gratitude that he was standing guard. I looked at my dad's 2 swatches of exposed skin, smooth shoulder and sculpted chin. They were so white, more like the color of chalk than skin, and I realized that without blood running through it, a body was just an empty shell. Everything that made this ghoulish white vessel my dad was gone. His opinions, his thoughts, his warmth. This body was just Dad's temporary shelter, which he made his own through workouts and haircuts and silly smiles, but now had no purpose at all. So where is my dad? Where did he go? How could a lifetime of thoughts and wisdom vanish into nothingness? I had come here to talk to him, but standing there, I realized I had nothing to say to this matrix of bones and decomposing organs. My dad's body was just like this room, hollow and soulless, with nothing to grab onto. I had already told him everything that needed to be said in my prayers, things I couldn't say with that orderly standing there. I did a bad thing, I'd confessed. I betrayed everything you ever taught me about being a good person. But I know how the system works, how rich people buy cops and juries and judges. Someone was going to get bought, it might as well be us. If he could have talked back, he'd have told me that some things were more important than money, like dignity, honesty, and honor. And of course, he'd have been right. To move forward with the arrangement we'd agreed to, I had to let my dad go. Not the stiffening mass on the table in front of me. I had to let go of what he'd stood for. "I'm sorry, Daddy," I whispered to my dad's dead body. Pain crept up my throat, but I choked it down. I took a slow, deep breath for strength, then took a step back. "I'm done," I announced. My orderly nodded and pulled up the sheet. And that's how I said goodbye to my dad. Chapter 34. He told me that he loved me. Nobody ever said, "I love you" to me, except my mom and dad. And at first, I didn't believe him. But he just kept saying it, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And after the third or fourth time, I figured he really meant it. So I said it back. To be fair, I wanted to believe he loved me. Because I loved him. I loved the way he smelled. I loved how his laugh made me feel light as a feather. I loved the way his hand felt holding mine. I felt happy when I was with him, and anxious when we were apart. I thought Romeo and Juliet was stupid when we read it in 10th grade, but now that I knew what it felt like to want to die for someone, I totally got it. That's how I felt about Logan, and I was pretty sure that's how he felt about me. Which is why I had to tell him everything. I wanted to know I was his Juliet, who he would love no matter what I did or where I came from. I needed to prove to myself what we had was real, which meant we couldn't have secrets from each other. My parents argued sometimes about who had the car keys last, or how we would pay for my dance lessons, but they never kept secrets from each other. My dad always said love dies in dishonesty. If you can't share your true self with someone, he once told me, you're wasting your time. I didn't think I was wasting my time with Logan, but I wanted to be sure. I wanted to know everything about him, and I was ready for him to know everything about me. It all started with the video. If I had given it to Officer Rice Krispies, instead of to Evan, things would be very different. I wouldn't live in this big house or be at a new school. I wouldn't have a Louis Vuitton bag, an ensuite bathroom, or friends with bright futures. And I wouldn't have met Logan. Our relationship wasn't real if he didn't know how I got here. So I had to tell him the whole story, and that video was the key. At first, I was surprised that he wanted to watch it. But then, of course, it made perfect sense. He loved me, no matter what. And he knew that if I didn't watch the video, I would never know what happened that day. He wanted to help me find closure. He wanted to watch it with me so I didn't feel scared and alone. That's what you do when you love someone. You stand by them, even through the ugly stuff. That's what he wanted to do for me. "Are you sure you want to see this?" I asked him as the video started to play. I knew from the concave silhouette of my dad's face under that napkin that something gruesome was coming. I had tried to bring myself to watch the video at least a dozen times since my trip to the morgue, but so far, hadn't been able to bring myself to do it. "Are you sure you want to see it?" Logan asked me. It was already playing. Mom and Dad were driving home from somewhere. I recognized the neighborhood. They were close to home. They would be on our street in less than a minute. I thought about asking him to watch it first, or even for me. But I wanted him to be my partner, not my protector. We loved each other. We would do this together. "Yes," I said simply. I wanted to show him I was brave, that I could handle it. He reached for my hand and held it tight, and I knew I'd made the right choice. If you need to look away, just put your head right here. He patted the smooth nook between his neck and shoulder, and I nodded. I remembered watching Halloween with my dad when I was a little girl, how I had buried my head in that exact spot during the scary parts. But Logan wasn't my dad, and I wasn't a little girl anymore. I'll be okay, I told him, and believed it. That's how safe he made me feel. Our eyes were glued to the phone as the Cherokee turned onto my street. Only a matter of seconds now. The car stopped. My head felt floaty as I held my breath. The dash cam didn't have a mic, so there was no noise to drown out the thumping of my heart. For several seconds, we stared at the street I once called mine. It was eerily quiet, and for a hopeful second, I thought nothing was going to happen, that we'd be spared. But then there was movement. A man stepped in front of the car. I could see clear as day that it was my dad. He was wearing the shiny Adidas warm-ups we gave him for his birthday. He was rounding the front of the car to open my mom's door. He always opened the door for her, and she always waited for him. I used to tease her about it, but she insisted she only let him do it, so he could feel like her knight in shining armor, that he liked it. Maybe if I had teased her more insistently, she would have stopped letting him do it. But I didn't, and now it was too late. Maybe you should look away, Logan said, and I shook my head no. There was an urgency in his voice, like he wanted to protect me from what was about to come. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt tears slide down my chin and onto my chest. No point wiping them away. There were surely a lot more coming. My dad was out of frame now. The camera was not positioned to see the side of the car, only the front, so I could only guess what he was doing. Opening the door, coaxing my mom out of her seat. She was always slow to get out of the car. She had to unplug her phone, gather her purse, get her water bottle or coffee cup out of the cup holder. The seconds passed like hours. My head felt so light, I thought it might fly off. And then the waiting was over. The first thing we saw was the image rock, like an earthquake shaking the car. Then snow was falling, as window glass rained down on the hood in an angry blizzard. Then a car, a black SUV, sped through the left side of the frame like a silent freight train. I heard myself gasp as a person that must have been my mom bounced off the hood and down out of sight. Brake lights lit up as the SUV stopped. A bright red car door danced and spun on one edge, then skidded to the ground. A limp body and shiny warm-ups peeled off the front of it and flopped to the pavement. The SUV was frozen in the distance, brake lights lit, like it knew it should stay. I stared at the back of the car that killed my dad. Black SUVs were a staple of Southern California. There were literally thousands of them, and I couldn't tell a Toyota from a Tesla. But this car, I knew, because it was exactly the same as one I had ridden in dozens of times. "Oh my God, he has the same car as you," I blurted, the shock of recognition prickling up my spine. I had no idea the danger this innocent admission had just put me in. How I would come to wish I had kept my mouth shut. The brake lights went out. Sunlight illuminated the back of the SUV like a spotlight. That's when I saw it. In that split second between the brake lights going dark and the SUV barreling away, a bumper sticker that said, "Devils." Except it didn't say devils, because it was upside down. Someone had drawn a vertical line through the upside-down V to make it look like the letter M, spelling the word slimed. It was so small in the frame, if it wasn't so familiar to me, I might not have even noticed it. But I did, and there was no denying it. That car was one of many, but that sticker was one of a kind, and they both belonged to Logan. He clicked off the phone. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. It was impossible that the car in the video was his, but it was more impossible that it wasn't. My hand holding Logan's went limp. I wanted to cry out, but terror had a chokehold on my throat. I should have taken his advice. I should have looked away. I wished I hadn't seen it. Because now, I knew this boy who came out of nowhere to love me had worse secrets than mine. "Well," Logan said, "now you've seen it." I should have looked at him. I should have pretended that I didn't recognize the car, or the sticker, or the double meaning in his words. I should have acted like I was so overwhelmed by seeing my dad get run over that I couldn't possibly have noticed anything else. But I didn't, because I was terrified. Not by the accident or by seeing my dad's dead body. I was terrified of the impossible coincidence that, of course, wasn't a coincidence at all. I was terrified of him. "I need to go check on my mom," I said, trying to keep my voice from cracking. I slipped out the door and down the hall toward my mom's room. I pushed open the door to see her sitting up in bed, reading on her phone. As she looked up at me, I put a finger over my lips. "How are you feeling?" I asked her, careful to keep my voice calm and steady, even though I could feel my eyes bulging with fear. She furrowed her brow but answered the question. "I'm good," she said, trying to match the brightness in my voice, not the alarmed expression on my face. "I was just playing Scrabble." "Oh, can I see?" I held out my hand and she put her phone in it. I closed the game and typed a note with shaking hands. "Put on your shoes. We need to get out of here. Now." I passed her the phone. Her eyes flickered with surprise, but she didn't flinch. "I think I need to go out for a bit," she announced. I nodded, almost imperceptibly, but enough so she knew she was on the right track, and to say more. "I'd love your company." She swung her legs off the bed and leaned over to slip on her boots, steel-toed Timberlands I picked out for her online, perfect for the drizzly winter nights that would soon be upon us. But before she had the chance to put them on, Logan appeared in the doorway. "How's everybody feeling?" he asked. The question was meant for my mom, but he was staring at me. "Hungry," Mom responded without missing a beat. "I was just going to drag Savannah to the grocery store." "Yeah," Logan replied. "I don't think so." He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. He had something in his hand. He saw me looking at it, so he raised his arm to show me. It was a kitchen knife, the one meant for cleaving meat. The blade was wide and razor sharp. "Logan, what are you doing with that?" I stammered. The sight of my boyfriend, standing in the doorway, flashing a knife as long and thick as my arm, made my head spin. I tried to tell myself this wasn't really happening, that it couldn't be happening. "Oh, come on," he belted. He sounded annoyed, like, wasn't it obvious? "We all knew this charade wouldn't last. You with my money? Living in this house like you belong here?" Mom looked at me. Her expression was a mix of bewilderment and terror. "I'm sorry," I whispered, and she suddenly got it. Why Logan had pursued me, that he was the one Evan was protecting, that we were in deep shit. "Let's all just calm down," Mom said. "Nobody took your money, Logan. The money to buy this house was a settlement." "It wasn't my fault," he spat back, then turned to me. His face was red with rage. "Your dad was stupid. What kind of moron steps out in front of a speeding car? This was a setup. He set me up." I shook my head in stunned disbelief. Does he really believe my dad died on purpose? The suggestion was as absurd as him standing there waving that knife. "We don't want your money," Mom said. Her voice was steady, but tight with fear. "You can have it back. All of it. We didn't know it was yours." "It's too late," Logan said. "Don't you get it?" He suddenly looked exhausted, his lips puckered with frustration. "My dad doesn't give a shit about you. all this? He waved the knife in the air, indicating the room, the house, all that had become ours. It isn't a gift meant for you. It's a punishment meant for me. You got all this, so I would have nothing. I raced to put the pieces together in my mind. He killed my dad, so his dad took his money and gave it to us. That's why he came to my school, to find me and make me fall in love with him. He was never into me, not even for a second. I couldn't believe how gullible I had been, believing his compliments and I love yous. He didn't love me. He despised me. The realization ripped through my heart like a bullet. My disappointment and shame poured out in sobs. We didn't know, I insisted. We never would have taken it if we'd known. Why'd you have to keep that video? Logan asked, eyes boring into my tear-streaked face. You already had the money. He wasn't going to give it back to me. Mom jumped to my defense. She had no intention of showing it to anyone. She showed it to me. Logan snapped back, then raised the knife and shook it at me. I knew you were weak, he seethed. I knew you would show someone. I was never safe from your squealing little fingers. I'm sorry, I mustered, because he was right. I was weak, because I did show it to someone I thought loved me. I cried harder, and Mom squeezed my hand. Because she trusted you, Mom said. She's not going to show it to anyone else. We'll delete it right now. She snuck a glance at me, and I nodded that I would. We have nothing to gain by telling anyone it was you, she reasoned. Nobody else has to know. But he ignored her and laid into me. You did it to yourself, he said, his blue eyes boring into mine. He reached behind him and locked the bedroom door, then waved us toward the closet. Get in the closet. Logan, please, I begged. Why does he want us to go into the closet? Dad used to keep guns in his bedroom closet, but we weren't at our old apartment, and I had no idea where they were now. Get in. He pointed the knife at me and charged at my throat. Mom grabbed me and pulled me out of its reach. Okay, she soothed, one hand outstretched like she was commanding a dog to stay. We're going. She stood up, then looked at me and squeezed my hand. We're in this together, the gesture telegraphed. Two are stronger than one. Hurry up, Logan commanded. And Mom made that okay hand gesture again, then slowly led me toward her closet. As she opened the closet door, full of her things, and God willing those guns, Logan barked, Wait! He peeked in the other closet, the empty his. This one, he ordered. Mom's face twitched with disappointment, and I knew I was right about the guns, that she kept them tucked on a high shelf between her sweaters and jeans, just like Dad did. If it's the money you want, we can work something out, Mom said. But Logan just laughed. You made it really easy for me by taking all those pills, he said through the crooked smile I once adored, but now made me sick. When they find your dead bodies, they'll see there was a history and won't be suspicious. My head felt light as blood waterfalled into my feet. He was not improvising. He had planned this, ever since the day he'd taken me out for tacos. You're right, Mom said, trying one last time to bargain with him. No one would question if something happened to me. But Savannah, she had nothing to do with this. She's a smart girl. You could work it out. Stop it, Logan shouted. Stop talking and get in. He pointed at the closet with his knife hand. His arm muscles flexed rock hard. His knuckles were white. He was strong, but I was fast. I suddenly thought, if I can get by him, I might be able to run for help. I felt a surge of determination. The hallway between two closets was wide. I could definitely slip past him. But then what? He had a weapon, and I didn't. If he threw that knife at me, I'd be toast. But he said he was going to kill us anyway, so what did I have to lose? Like a sprinter in the starting gate, I readied myself to spring. I twisted my back foot in the carpet, hoping my mom would see the signal that I was going to make a move. She showed me she did when she shifted her weight away from me to give me space. "Move back," Logan ordered. My mom glanced at me as she stood firm. "I said, move back." Once again, she defied the order. He raised his free arm to push her. She grabbed it and shouted, "Go!" She yanked his arm with all her might, widening my path just enough to streak through. I exploded off my back foot. Adrenaline surged through my body as I lunged for the door. I had a solid jump on him, plus the element of surprise. By the time he turned around, my hand was on the door handle. I pulled on it hard. It didn't budge. I forgot he had locked it. "Savannah, watch out!" I turned around. Logan was lunging for my throat. He swung the knife. I ducked, and it connected with the door. Mom's arms were around Logan's neck in a flash, but he was too strong for her, and he quickly shook her off, then body slammed her to the ground. Her head bounced off the wall, then rolled to one side. "Mom!" I sprang to standing. The knife was still in the door, but Logan was between it and me. There was no way I could get to it. I scanned the room for a weapon, anything that could even the fight. My eyes combed the furniture, the walls, the floor. That's when I saw them. Mom's steel-toed boots. I stumbled back toward the bed, groping for a boot, as Logan grabbed the knife and yanked it free. My hand found the boot, and I plunged my fist into the shank and raised it like a claw. All that love I'd felt for him swirled into a vortex of rage and hate. If this was a fight to the death, I was ready. As the knife came at my chest, I swung the steel-toed Timberland at Logan's outstretched arm. It missed his arm, but slammed into his hand, springing the knife from his fingers and sending it clattering to the ground. "You little bitch," he growled as he shook his hand, then lowered his shoulder and came at me like a battering ram. I cried out as I slammed the boot down on his back. It sank into his flesh, but was not enough to stop him. My lungs burned for air as he slammed my back against the floor. He was on top of me now, the full weight of him across my chest, using his knees to pin my arms to my sides. I bucked and flailed my legs, but they were as useless as kite tails in the wind. "I should have slit your throat when I had the chance," he hissed, then grabbed me by my hair and yanked me to my feet. Pain shot across my scalp. I cried out. "Shut up," he barked, as he dragged me toward the open, empty closet. My mom groaned and tried to grab his legs, but he kicked her aside. My screams turned to sobs as I watched her body wilt back down onto the carpet. "This is your fault," he hissed as he pushed me into the closet. He raised my arms above my head, then took off his belt and used it to bind my wrists to the clothing rod. He gripped the knife and floated it under my nose. "I should gut you like a fish," he rasped. Fear surged through me as he held the knife under my chin. For a second, I thought he might actually do it. "Fuck it," he said, pulling his arm back and letting the knife drift down by his leg. "You're not worth the trouble." He walked away, then a few seconds later returned, dragging my mom by her shoulders. Her eyelids fluttered as blood caked on her hairline. "Mama," I whimpered. The leather belt pulled at my wrists as I strained to get to her, to touch her, to hold on to her, love her back to life. The door slammed shut, and we were plunged into darkness. I heard the thump of something heavy landing in front of the door, then silence. "Mama, can you hear me?" My voice was high, like a warbly bird. She whimpered softly. She was concussed, but she was alive. My wrists burned against the thick leather tether as I tried to work them free. The bind was tight. but I felt a little flicker of hope as I realized I could move them. It might take a few hours, but I was pretty sure I could stretch the leather enough to wriggle them out. I pulled on the belt, sliding it back and forth against the rough wooden bar. My shoulders ached already, but I knew from my track workouts that I could push through. I settled into the pain, taking slow, deep breaths. I felt a tiny bud of confidence, a swell of hope that gave me strength. And then I smelled it. Smoke, sour and pungent, like a smoldering campfire. It was seeping in under the door. This house that was so carefully chosen for my mom and me was burning. And barring a miracle, we were going to burn with it.
Libby, 3 months ago. Shopping at Home Depot made me feel like a boss. I loved wandering the aisles, looking at all the tools and fixtures, discovering the secrets of how a house became a home. Today, I was in the garden center. I knew flowers for our front yard did not qualify as essential, but they made my heart happy, so I decided to indulge. The prettiest ones were the perennials. I couldn't carpet my lawn like in The Wizard of Oz, but a few strategically placed clusters could go a long way, and the optimist in me insisted by this time next year we'd have enough money to plant twice as many. I pushed my cart through the wonderland of lilies. I loved their long, slender necks and starbursts of color. I chose some stargazers for their zingy fuchsia petals. I would put them by the mailbox so our mail carrier could enjoy their tangy, sweet smell. They say home is where the heart is. It's a romantic notion, but not a terribly realistic one. There are plenty of days my heart is on a beach on the French Riviera with a good book and a bottomless martini. Doesn't make it my home. No, a home is not where your heart is. It's where your effort is. It's where you cook and eat and sleep and take pains to decorate. It's where your memories are made and kept. It's the photos on the mantel, the artwork on the walls, the blankets that you snuggle under, the trees and flowers that you plant and care for. A home is not a faraway place that lives in your heart. It's where you are today and every day. It's an extension of who you are. As I loaded some playful peonies into my cart, I wondered, what does it say about me that my home is falling apart? Am I a reflection of my crumbling home, or is it a reflection of me? Did I drive it to ruins, or did the ruins corrupt me? Which one is the chicken, and which one is the egg? When we bought our house, with its aging cupboards and sagging floorboards, we were full of optimism and grand ideas. But over time, we became the home we had bought, tired, worn out, and sad. We were a total mismatch from the start. For years, we were engaged in a struggle over whose aesthetic would prevail. The house knew what it was and what it wanted to be, and it was winning. I had no idea if my cheery purple peonies would help close the gap, but I was ready to fight back. For my husband, for my children, and yes, for me. If I was going to manifest a bright future, it was going to start right here in the garden center at Home Depot. If there was a better metaphor for reinvigorating my marriage than dumping a 25-pound bag of fertilizer on our dull, tired soil, I couldn't think of one. My commitment to support my husband was renewed right then and there, and I would tend to our home life until those wilted flowers bloomed again. Chapter 35. Margot's room was at the front of the house. It had a big circular window overlooking the street, with a padded window seat for all her dolls. Because the window curved like the inside of a spoon, we couldn't put a shade over it, which was fine with her. She liked the rising moon as her nightlight. But that night her room was lit by a different light. It wasn't cool, blue, and steady. It was hot and danced angrily on her walls. It scared her, and so she came downstairs. "There's something outside my room," she said, twisting her nightie between nervous fingers as she came into the family room where Andy and I were both on our laptops. "What is it, sweetie?" Andy asked, opening his arms to give her a hug. At 7, she was just on the outside edge of being a little girl. Her hair was losing its bouncy curls, and her first grown-up teeth were starting to sprout through her gums. "I'm scared," she said. Margot often had trouble sleeping and needed a second or third tuck-in. We'd gone through this drill hundreds of times. "I'll go," I offered, taking her hand in mine. "Let's go get you all tucked in." She let me pull her out of her daddy's lap, and we walked up the stairs hand in hand. She had a million reasons to come get one of us. I heard a noise. I saw a bug. My room is cold. They were all just excuses to get one of us to tuck her in again. I figured this was just another one of those times. Until I walked into her room. "Oh my God!" I gasped, pulling Margot toward me and peering out her window. Flames were curling out of the upstairs windows of Holly's house, lapping the roof, sending funnels of smoke up into the sky. "Andy!" I shouted as I hoisted Margot onto my hip and backed away from the window toward the door. Andy thundered up the stairs. "Holy shit!" he exclaimed from the threshold of her room. "I'm calling 911, I said, clutching Margot to my breast as I ran for the phone. I put Margot down and dialed with shaking hands. 911, what's your emergency?" Margot sobbed into my leg as I spat out our address. "The roof of the house across the street is on fire," I stammered. "It's burning out of control." The operator was eerily calm as she asked, "Are the occupants of the house at home?" I dropped the phone. "Andy!" Andy burst out of Tatum's room, clutching our 4-year-old. "Get in the car. Take the girls. I want you out of here." "What if they're in there?" I demanded. It was 8 o'clock at night. He didn't answer, so I asked again. "What if Holly and Savannah are trapped inside?" "What's happening?" Tatum asked, rubbing her eyes. Andy handed her to me. Margot was clutching my leg. "Go with Mommy," he coaxed. Margot grabbed onto his shirt and held it tight. "What are you going to do?" our 7-year-old asked, and I wanted to know too. "I'm going to make sure Savannah and her mommy are okay," he said. I shook my head. "You're not going in there," I commanded. "No way." "I'll meet you at the bottom of the hill," he said, running into our bedroom, pulling on his shoes on the way out. "Andy, please," I begged. My husband was capable, but he was not a firefighter. I didn't want him anywhere near there. "I won't do anything stupid," he promised. He kissed Margot, Tatum, then me. "Now go," he commanded. Then he ran down the stairs and out the door.
This is the end of disc number 6. Please insert disc number 7.